If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 1, The Marine Genius Imprisoned in Impel Down. Level 6 of Impel Down. In a solitary cell. A young man with black hair slowly opened his eyes. He looked to be around 18 or 19 years old, dressed in a striped prison uniform. Heavy sea prism stone shackles restrained his wrists and ankles. Ever since the Golden Lion broke both his legs and escaped over a decade ago, Impel Down began placing shackles on extremely dangerous criminals. A person might still be able to fight without legs, but without legs and hands, it's impossible. Clearly, this young man was considered extremely dangerous. He slowly moved his neck, producing a series of cracking sounds. Sitting up from the ground, he leaned against the cold wall and stared blankly at the ceiling. His name was Sanders, a former Marine Rear Admiral. It had been 19 years since he was reincarnated into the world of One Piece. He became an orphan at a very young age and was later adopted by a Marine. At 14, he finally received the long-awaited gift, a special ability known as the power of derivation. As the name suggests, he could derive anything. Without consuming any resources, he could derive techniques, haki, combat styles, and even various devil fruit powers. However, this ability was not without limitations. The more complex and mysterious the thing he wanted to derive, the more time it would take. Moreover, he could only derive one type of ability at a time. For instance, he could only derive one devil fruit power at a time. He couldn't derive two devil fruit abilities simultaneously. The good news was he could possess multiple devil fruit abilities without exploding. After all, he hadn't really eaten the devil fruits. Though seawater and sea prism stone could suppress him, the effect wasn't too significant. He could even use some of his abilities while in the ocean. For example, he couldn't derive both armament haki and observation haki simultaneously, it had to be one after the other. If the derivation process was interrupted, he could switch to something else. The progress wouldn't reset. It was like downloading a movie online, you could pause and resume whenever you wanted. Just like how downloading with a premium membership speeds things up, derivation could also be accelerated. The closer he was to what he wanted to derive, the faster and easier the process. For instance, if he wanted to derive armament haki, it might take him a year of relaxing at home to develop basic armament haki. But if he were near someone proficient in armament haki, it might take only half a year. Training under a strong mentor, sparring, or observing battles would also speed up the derivation process. Considering the dangers of the One Piece world, and with his adoptive father being a Marine, Sanders decided to join the Marines to grow stronger. The Marines had plenty of strong people to teach him. The former Admiral Zephyr, in particular, had various skills that could accelerate his derivation process, such as armament haki, observation haki, combat techniques, and more. To make himself more valuable to Marine headquarters, he joined Zephyr's elite training camp. The first ability he chose to derive was the Goro Goro no Mi, Rumble Rumble fruit. A powerful Logia-type fruit would ensure that Marine headquarters noticed him, making it easy for him to join Zephyr's camp. The Goro Goro no Mi also matched his aesthetic preferences. Thankfully, he had received a beginner's survival gift pack that gave him an instant derivation ability. Otherwise, it would have taken him at least 5 years to derive the Goro Goro no Mi, given how far away Skypiea and its users were. What followed was smooth sailing. He joined the Marines successfully and became a member of Zephyr's training camp. Thanks to his derivation ability, within just a year, he mastered the 6 powers of the Marines, armament haki and observation haki. His talents shocked all of Marine headquarters. He was hailed as the most gifted person in hundreds of years, alongside Akainu, Kizaru, and Aokiji, the 4 monsters of the Logia-type Marines. Smoker wasn't included. Using the credit he earned from defeating pirates in the first half of the Grand Line, he quickly became the youngest Marine Rear Admiral. For a time, the Marines dominated the headlines. Many pirates were so terrified of the 4 Logia-type Marine monsters that they didn't dare to act out. Unfortunately, good times don't last. A year later, while on a mission in the Sabayati archipelago, his adoptive father was heartlessly shot and killed by a celestial dragon while trying to protect a civilian. Having lost his only family, Sanders couldn't stand it any longer. He immediately planned to kill the celestial dragon in revenge and defect from the Marines to become a pirate. Before he could act, the world government charged him with plotting to harm the world nobles and betraying the government, ordering Fleet Admiral Sengoku to arrest him. To prevent Sanders from escaping with his Goro Goro no Mi powers, the world government sent Kizaru, the user of the Pika Pika no Mi, Glint Glint fruit, along with CP0 to oversee the mission. At that time, Sengoku was about to be promoted to Fleet Admiral, and Kizaru was set to become a Marine Admiral. In other words, Sanders had to face 2 Admiral-level opponents simultaneously. Thinking about this still made him angry. 1 Admiral wasn't enough, they had to send Kizaru as well. If it had been anyone else, he might have had a chance to escape. But the world government was determined not to let him become a pirate. Despite trying everything, he ultimately failed to escape. Kizaru's speed was faster than his, giving him no chance to flee. In the end, he was defeated and imprisoned in level 6 of Impel Down. Now, it had been 3 years since his imprisonment. Taking a deep breath, Sanders mentally opened his panel. Name, Sanders. Age, 19. Abilities. Goro Goro no Mi, Awakened. Advanced Armament Haki. Advanced Observation Haki. Advanced Conqueror's Haki. Giant's Strength. Advanced Combat Skills. Marine 6 Powers. Life Return. Without exaggeration, he was now Admiral level. According to what Sanders knew, the current 3 Admirals all had advanced combat skills, Haki, and awakened devil fruits. These were the minimum requirements to become a top-tier fighter. Even Kizaru, who Zephyr criticized for relying too much on his devil fruit, had advanced Haki and combat skills. As for Zephyr, known for his mastery of armament Haki, his Haki was at the top level. It was common knowledge that armament Haki differed in both quality and quantity depending on the person. Zephyr's armament Haki was the strongest Sanders had ever seen. With the same amount of armament Haki, Zephyr had higher defense and greater attack power than anyone else. That's why Zephyr's Haki was considered top tier. Being in Impel Down had taken away his freedom, but it had also provided him with the nourishment to grow stronger. The entirety of level 6 was constantly feeding his strength. That was one reason why he hadn't immediately tried to escape. Where else could he find so many powerful individuals to fuel his derivation at all times? Of course, another reason he hadn't tried to escape was that Magellan was too strong. In the narrow confines of Impel Down, the Doku Doku no Mi, Venom fruit, gave Magellan a huge advantage. Without absolute confidence, Sanders wouldn't attempt an escape. As for his fruit abilities, the Goro Goro no Mi was the first ability he derived. After joining the Marines, he spent most of his time developing it. With the help of the Marines and Vegapunk, his fruit development progressed rapidly. A year after his imprisonment, he achieved awakening. The Moa Moa no Mi came from the World Breaker, Burndy World. That man was also a prisoner on level 6, not far from Sanders, which made it easy to derive his power. It only took a year to fully derive it, since they were together all the time. The giant's strength came from the later Blackbeard pirate, Sanwan Wolf. As for Haki, his armament Haki and observation Haki were at intermediate and basic levels before entering Impel Down. By leeching off Douglas Bullet, he reached his current state. Douglas Bullet was truly strong, especially when it came to armament Haki, which was at the top level. Unlike Zephyr, Bullet's top-tier status came from the sheer amount of armament Haki he possessed. In terms of quantity, Bullet had far more armament Haki than anyone else Sanders had ever seen. In the movie, Bullet even covered his gigantic body with Haki. If Bullet hadn't messed around with his mecha in the film, he wouldn't have lost. The Gasa Gasa no Mi, fusion fruit, really held Bullet back. If he had just eaten a random Zoan fruit, Bullet would have been practically invincible with his armament Haki alone. Sanders only developed his advanced combat skills and life return after entering Impel Down. He and Bullet were the only ones in the prison who kept up with their training. They were often mocked by other pirates for this, but neither of them cared. They continued to train every day. Sanders scrolled down his panel with his mind, revealing the abilities he was currently deriving. Chapter 2, Recruiting the Devil's Descendant. Currently deriving Douglas Bullet's fusion fruit, 2 hours remaining. Currently deriving Douglas Bullet's advanced armament Haki, 1 hour remaining. Currently deriving Big Mom's iron balloon physique, 5 years, 317 days, and 18 hours remaining. These were the abilities Sanders was currently deriving. Once the first 2 abilities were successfully derived, it would be time for him to break out to fight his way out of Impel Down. He refused to believe that the poison fruit, as powerful as it was, could surpass advanced armament Haki. The fusion fruit was also quite useful. It allowed the rearrangement and combination of organic materials to create all sorts of weapons. After his escape, Sanders planned to use this ability to create a ship powered by electricity. Vegapunk had already designed an electric battleship for him, it just hadn't been built yet before he was imprisoned in Impel Down. But he still remembered the blueprints. He could easily use the fusion fruit to make one himself. His relationship with Vegapunk had been decent, they had even collaborated on some experiments. Big Mom's iron balloon physique was something Sanders had always desired. With it, one could become incredibly strong without even training. In terms of natural talent, Big Mom was likely the most gifted in the entire One Piece world. She had reached Vice Admiral level strength when she was just a child. If not for her eating disorder and constantly giving birth, it would be hard to say who would hold the title of the world's strongest. Unfortunately, the time needed to derive the iron balloon ability was too long. Sanders had to pause halfway to focus on obtaining the giant's strength from San Juan Wolf. Looking further down the interface, there were several abilities that were paused mid-derivation. Deriving the Super Saiyan bloodline from Dragon Ball, 249 years, 364 days, and 23 hours remaining. Paused. Deriving Saitama's serious punch from One Punch Man, 199 years, 364 days, and 23 hours remaining. Paused. Deriving the 8 gates from Naruto, 119 years, 364 days, and 23 hours remaining. Paused. More abilities were listed. Aside from powers from the One Piece world, all other abilities from different universes had derivation times exceeding 100 years. Even the weakest small skills took this long. Sanders speculated that the distance between him and those worlds was the reason for the prolonged derivation time. After all, it took him 5 years to derive the Rumble fruit on Skypiea. Crossing entire universes, making 100 years seem short, was understandable. Watching the countdown on his abilities decrease, Sanders knew his time in Impel Down was running out. At that moment, the sound of chains echoed in the 6th level. Along with the chains, the noise of training also reached Sanders' ears. Douglas Bullet was doing his usual workout. After a moment of contemplation, Sanders called out toward Bullet. "Hey, Bullet." Bullet didn't respond. Sanders smirked slightly, releasing an invisible pressure from his body that began to spread outward. A terrifying wave of Conqueror's Haki surged toward Bullet. Boom! Faced with Sanders' provocation, Douglas Bullet wasn't about to stand idly by. His own Conqueror's Haki burst forth, colliding with Sanders. The intense clash of willpower caused shockwaves in the 6th level, forcing many pirates to bend under the overwhelming pressure. Damn it! Not again! Can't you two give it a rest? Damn you, Sanders! Ever since you got here, we haven't had a moment of peace. Shut up, you two escape dreamers! The pirates in the 6th level cursed and complained. While Sanders' steady increase in strength brought him some joy, life in Impel Down's 6th level was still unbearably boring. Using Conqueror's Haki clashes as a form of entertainment had become his only amusement over the past few years. Unfortunately for the other prisoners, they had to suffer through it as well. At first, it wasn't so bad, as Sanders' Conqueror's Haki wasn't that strong, but as it advanced to a higher level, the disturbances became harder to ignore. What do you want? Speak. Bullet withdrew his Haki and continued his training, speaking softly. Seeing that Bullet had finally responded, Sanders retracted his Haki and asked. Bullet, why don't you join my crew and become my first mate? Before Bullet could respond, a voice echoed through the 6th level. It was the corrupt king, Avalo Pizarro. Haha. Sanders, are you playing house now? Are you planning to form a pirate crew right here in Impel Down? Captain of the Impel Down pirate crew, Sanders the marine trader, bounty, 0 berries. Ha ha ha. Still dreaming of escape, hey. The other pirates burst into mocking laughter as they joined in. That's right. You and Bullet are the only ones still training here. What are you thinking? Give up already. The only reason Golden Lion escaped is because he had the float fruit. He didn't need to fight on solid ground. To escape, we'd have to cut off our hands and feet, but without them, we'd be nowhere near full strength. How could we fight Magellan? And don't forget, there's an entire naval fleet guarding the prison outside. Just give it up. Shut your mouths. Sanders, annoyed by their chatter, unleashed a burst of Conqueror's Haki, pressuring the loudest of them into submission. Damn marine brat! Nobody here is afraid of you. Government dog! Who do you think you're bossing around here? The pirates weren't intimidated, continuing to shout defiantly. After all, they were in Impel Down, where everyone was imprisoned and equally powerless. So what if Sanders had Conqueror's Haki? They weren't weaklings who could be knocked out by it. And since Sanders had once been a Marine, the other prisoners naturally viewed him with hostility, giving him no respect. Ignoring their outbursts, Sanders turned back to Bullet. So, Bullet, what's your decision? Do you want to be my first crewmate? After breaking out of Impel Down, Sanders knew he would need to form his own crew. With Douglas Bullett's strength being among the top in the world, Sanders definitely wanted him as an ally. Even though he wasn't too hopeful, he still had to ask. I refuse. Bullet answered without hesitation. Chapter 3, The Escape begins. Sanders wasn't surprised by Bullet rejection. Having read the original story, he knew that Bullet's past experiences made him distrustful of others. After joining Roger's pirate crew, the idea of having to protect comrades made him feel that he wasn't fighting decisively enough, which in turn made him believe he had become weaker. That's why he left Roger's crew. Barrett firmly believed that being strong alone was what truly mattered. But Sanders still wanted to try and win him over. After all, if he wanted to fight against the world government and destroy the celestial dragons, he would need powerful comrades by his side. Solo fighting wouldn't be enough. If Barrett joined, Sanders could take on the 4 emperors right away. Speaking of which, red-haired Shanks was probably about to become the 4th emperor. What if I help you escape from Impel Down? Sanders asked. I refuse. Barrett continued training his strength without hesitation. No one could become his comrade, not even Pirate King Roger, let alone a kid who was once a Marine. Besides, Barrett hadn't fully refined his own power yet. All right, Sanders shrugged and turned to the Red Count. What about you, Red Count? As a top-tier powerhouse of the previous era, the Red Count was now quite old. But Sanders knew that the Red Count was aware of the whereabouts of a mythical Zoan fruit. Once he ate that fruit, age would no longer limit his power. I refuse. The Red Count's voice was sharp and aged. Kid, you're not qualified to be my captain. Like Barrett, he too rejected Sanders. Sanders didn't press further. Out of everyone on level 6, only these 2 were worth recruiting. The rest of the prisoners didn't interest him at all. Hey, Marine, why aren't you asking me? A voice piped up. I want to play make-believe too. Captain of Impel Down's pirate crew, King of Evil Governance Ivalo Pizarro, at your service. Wahahaha. Pizarro's eerie laughter echoed across level 6. His sarcastic tone stirred laughter among the other prisoners. PSSH, he doesn't even care about you. Katerina Devon, one of the few female pirates there, sneered with a giggle. You damned woman, he doesn't care about you either. Pizarro snapped back, enraged. The 2 started hurling vicious insults at each other, arguing about strength, looks, and even their families. This was typical life on level 6. Darkness and isolation had made these pirates irritable, and had they not been locked in separate cells, they would have already fought to the death. Ignoring these lowlifes, Sanders focused on his interface, waiting in silence for the top-tier armament Haki to finish deriving. Once that power was his, he could begin his escape. With life return, the handcuffs and leg irons didn't really restrict him. Plus, the sea stone's suppression of his devil fruit ability was limited. Though he couldn't fully transform into lightning, he could still use a little bit of his power, like releasing a small shock. Time ticked by, and the remaining time for the top-tier armament Haki continued to decrease. Hey, Marine, why aren't you training today? Pizarro mocked. Did you finally give up? He never missed a chance to taunt Sanders. Pizarro hated Sanders for his former Marine identity. You should have given up a long time ago. We're never getting out of here. Isn't it better to wait here and die slowly with us? The other pirates, having lost all hope of escaping, were naturally irritated seeing someone who hadn't sunk into despair alongside them. I'm not like you worthless scum, Sanders replied calmly. Today, I'm getting out of here. I'm just conserving my strength. The pirates erupted in laughter, mocking Sanders mercilessly. Conserving your strength? More like you're still dreaming. Ha ha ha. You stupid Marine, wake up already. This is Impel Down, not your house. You can't just come and go as you please. Hey Marine, why aren't you talking? Did you finally wake up and realize reality? Are you lying on the floor, crying now? Haha. From marine genius to Impel Down prisoner. How does it feel to fall from the heavens to the pit of hell? So young and already locked up for life. Poor kid. You're probably still a virgin, hey. The pirates mocked Sanders endlessly, often trying to strike at his emotional wounds. They'd vividly describe the pleasures of the outside world, hoping to break him mentally. But it never worked. Sanders had never once lost his cool, which frustrated them to no end. As the pirates continued to taunt and jeer, the top-tier armament Haki was finally fully derived. An immense surge of power flowed through Sanders' body, making his armament Haki at least twice as powerful. Life return. Without any hesitation, Sanders used his mental control over his body and activated life return. His black hair began to grow longer, stretching over a meter in length, moving like tentacles. With his mental command, his hair stretched towards the handcuffs and leg irons. This was a rare and powerful ability that few Marines ever mastered. With it, you could inject your consciousness into your body and control any part of it, even your hair, nails, and internal organs. With 2 crisp clicks, the handcuffs and leg irons were effortlessly unlocked by Sanders. The moment the sea stone left his body, his suppressed power surged like a dam breaking. Terrifying bolts of lightning crackled around him, dancing like silver serpents, glowing brightly. His dim cell was now illuminated by the lightning, almost as bright as day. The surrounding air seemed to buzz with static electricity, filled with a faint crackling sound. Sanders' eyes gleamed with electricity, as if they could pierce the darkness. This was the power of the rumble fruit. Feeling his strength fully return, Sanders clenched his fists in excitement. His aura began to rise, exuding a terrifying pressure. He no longer suppressed his power, letting it flow freely. After 3 years of patience, the time had finally come for him to reap the rewards. The once noisy level 6 instantly fell silent. All eyes were drawn to Sanders' brightly lit cell and the overwhelming aura radiating from him. This is the power of the rumble fruit. Pizarro gasped in disbelief, gripping the bars of his cell as he stared at Sanders. Everyone knew that those wearing sea stone shackles couldn't use their devil fruit powers. Did this guy cut off his hands and feet? Someone whispered, recalling how the golden lion had escaped by cutting off his limbs. Has this kid gone insane? Without arms or legs, how could he hope to fight Impel Down's top enforcers like Magellan and Shiryu? Everyone on level 6 extended their observation Haki toward Sanders' cell, trying to figure out how he was using his devil fruit powers. The moment Sanders broke free of the sea stone shackles, dark clouds began to gather over Impel Down. Lightning crackled through the clouds, and thunder rumbled ominously, as if some world-ending storm was brewing. It was as if the sky was about to unleash destruction. Black clouds covered the sky, and in an instant, the day turned dark. Deep in the ocean, massive sea kings stirred in fear, swimming away to the depths. Above the sea, a massive fleet of marine ships surrounded Impel Down. Sailors stepped out of their cabins, gazing up at the sky in confusion. Just moments ago, the weather had been sunny and clear. How had it turned into this in the blink of an eye? Chapter 4, The Shocked Pirates. After adjusting to his newfound power, Sanders didn't suppress it anymore. Surrounded by crackling lightning, he took a step towards the door of his cell. Every footprint he left behind created charred, smoking pits, as if struck by lightning. Using life return, he unlocked the cell door just as effortlessly as before and walked out. The sound of the door opening echoed across level 6. Sanders stepped into the hallway. As he moved, thunder flashed, and his tall, muscular figure resembled a god of thunder descending upon the world, mysterious and awe-inspiring. Every prisoner on level 6 stared in wide-eyed shock at the sight before them. Many rubbed their eyes, unable to believe what they were seeing. The once silent level 6 prison was now filled with stunned gasps. Boom! After a brief moment of silence, Impel Down erupted into chaos. Am I seeing this right? Did that guy really escape? And he didn't even chop off his limbs. How is that possible? He wasn't lying when he said he was conserving his strength. Douglas Bullet stopped his training, his eyes locked onto Sanders as he walked down the corridor. So strong. While others were shocked by Sanders' escape, Bullet was more impressed by his strength. While Sanders had seemed unremarkable inside the cell, now that he was free of the sea stone shackles, his aura was overwhelming. Even Barrett found it startling. This guy is no weaker than me, Bullet thought to himself. He's a monster. Previously, Bullet had scoffed at the idea of Sanders being called a marine monster. But now, he had changed his mind. Sanders definitely deserved that title. Most importantly, Sanders wasn't even 20 years old yet. At the same age, Bullet felt like he hadn't been as powerful. However, Bullet quickly snapped out of his astonishment and resumed training. So what if Sanders was strong? Barrett didn't need comrades. Only making himself stronger mattered. Unlike Bullet, who quickly calmed down, the Red Count felt a twinge of regret. Earlier, he had thought Sanders was joking and had underestimated him, so he had refused his offer to join him. Now, seeing Sanders' strength, he realized Sanders was already one of the strongest in the world. Given his age, being Sanders' crew member didn't seem so shameful after all. But the Red Count knew he had missed his chance to escape Impel Down. He wouldn't stoop so low as to beg Sanders for help now, and even if he did, Sanders wouldn't agree to help him. Strong people have their own pride and way of doing things. So, despite his regret, the Red Count remained calm, closing his eyes and pretending to sleep. While Barrett and the Red Count managed to stay composed, the other prisoners couldn't. They didn't care about dignity, they would rather be someone's lackey than rot in the darkness of Impel Down. If Sanders could help them escape, they'd even be willing to call him Dad if it meant freedom. So, once they accepted the reality that Sanders had escaped, they started shouting desperately, hoping Sanders would free them too. Damn Marine, I mean, Lord Sanders, help me out of here. Let's break out together! Shouted Avalo Pizarro, the king of evil governance. We'll be your allies. He added. Take me with you. Take me with you. Yelled Baskerville, the heavy-drinking superhuman-type alcohol fruit user known as Big Drinker. Let me out. Let me out. Demanded San Juan Wolf, pounding the walls of his cell. I can turn into any woman you want. Just say the word. I know all kinds of moves I can make you very happy. Take me with you. Pleaded Katerina Devon. If she hadn't been so ugly, Sanders might have actually considered her offer. All around him, the prisoners begged Sanders to use his powers to free them, promising him treasures, women, and territory in return. One pirate even offered to give Sanders his wife and daughter. They all sang the same tune, let me out, and I'll give you anything you want even if I don't have it, I'll promise you the world. But Sanders had no interest in freeing these scumbags. They weren't even qualified to be his crew members. He wasn't like Blackbeard, who recruited any trash he could find. Listen up, you brats! Sanders shouted. I'm off to have some fun outside. You can all rot here and wait to die. Laughing, Sanders turned and walked away without even glancing at Douglas Barrett or the Red Count. They had rejected him, so he had no reason to keep trying to convince them. There were plenty of strong people out there he could recruit. Who knew if, after today, the defenses at Impel Down would tighten. Maybe Barrett and the Red Count would never escape after this. Realizing that Sanders had no intention of freeing them, the pirates either begged louder or cursed him. Come back! Come back! Please, I beg you, don't leave! Let me out! Let me out! You damn Marine! You won't get away! Magellan and Shiria will catch you! Screw you, Sanders! You'll be executed on the spot! You won't escape! You'll be killed! But Sanders paid no attention. It was as if he couldn't hear a word they said. Turning into a bolt of lightning, he dashed towards the exit. Breaking out of Impel Down, the escape begins now. Chapter 5, Ready for Battle. Impel Down, First Level, Monitoring Room. Dozens of large screens hung on the walls, displaying live surveillance footage from various areas of Impel Down. The prison guards were monitoring the inmates through the video images transmitted by the Den Den Mushi, except for Level 5, where the temperature was too low to install them. At the moment, 5 or 6 guards were yawning, looking half asleep. It's been over a decade since we had any trouble here. What's the point of keeping an eye on things like this every day? A young guard yawned, his voice tinged with boredom. Isn't it a good thing that there's been no trouble? You have no idea how many guards and Marines died back when the Golden Lion, Shiki, broke out, an older guard responded with a chuckle. We've got it good here. No fighting pirates like the Marines, and we don't have to worry about the weather. You're just taking it for granted. Wait until you're my age, you'll understand. Ha, yeah right. One big shot escape in 100 years, and now every pirate's locked up with their limbs bound. Even if Shiki came back, he wouldn't make it out again, the young guard scoffed. Everyone knew Shiki's escape was due to his float fruit powers. Without a similar ability, prisoners in Impel Down wouldn't even make it past the first level. After all, the Marine fleet outside wasn't just for show, and the calm belt teeming with Sea Kings surrounded them. Without the ability to fly, escape was impossible. "Hey, tell us the story of how Shiki broke out, would you? We're bored out of our minds anyway," another guard asked with a grin, clearly intrigued by the tale. "Shiki's escape, hey?" The older guard laughed, leaning back in his chair and resting his hands behind his head. Glancing at the monitors, he casually began, "Well, back then." Just as he was about to start his story, something caught his eye on the screen. His face went pale in an instant. On the screen, a tall figure surrounded by crackling lightning stood in the hallway of level 6. "Something's wrong. We have a breakout." The older guard lunged for the control panel, sounding the alarm as he grabbed the den mushi to alert the warden. The blaring alarm echoed throughout the prison. Other guards, who had also seen the figure on the screen, stared in horror. "Someone's escaped. Notify Warden Magellan immediately. It's Monster Rear Admiral Sanders. Sanders has broken out." At that moment, Magellan was sitting on the toilet, suffering from a bout of diarrhea. His usually fierce face had gone pale. When the alarm blared, his expression darkened. This was a sound he hadn't heard since the Golden Lion's escape over 10 years ago. "Buru buru buru buru." The den mushi rang. Magellan answered immediately. "Warden Magellan, it's bad. Sanders from level 6 has escaped." The terrified voice on the other end of the line didn't even wait for him to ask questions. Even the den mushi was sweating in fear. "Sanders?" Magellan instantly remembered who they were talking about, the Marine's youngest and most talented Rear Admiral ever, a prodigy of the Logia-type rumble fruit. How did he escape the sea stone cuffs and shackles? Did he cut off his limbs? Magellan asked quickly. After all, the Golden Lion had escaped by cutting off his legs. With both Sanders' hands and feet bound, the only way to escape should have been by severing his limbs. And no. Sanders is completely unharmed. His limbs are intact, there's no sign of injury. Magellan was puzzled. How could Sanders have escaped without cutting off his limbs? But there was no time to dwell on that. The most important task now was to recapture Sanders and put down this breakout. "Has anyone else escaped?" he asked. "No, it's just Sanders." That was a relief for Magellan. At least Sanders hadn't freed any of the other prisoners. If the criminals from level 6 had broken out en masse, the damage would have been catastrophic, even if they managed to suppress them. Each of the prisoners on level 6 was a monstrous figure. Dealing with one escapee was manageable. No matter how talented Sanders was, he was still just a teenager. "Keep a close eye on him. Report his movements to me immediately. Notify Han Yabao and Shiryu. Seal off all exits. Sanders must not be allowed to escape." Magellan ordered decisively. "Yes, Warden Magellan. Sanders has already reached level 5, but we don't have surveillance there because of the extreme cold," the guard reported before hanging up. Magellan hurriedly finished his business, wiped himself, and got off the toilet, ready to personally capture Sanders. The reputation of the Rumble Fruit and Sanders' genius title weighed heavily on his mind. He had to ensure that this time there would be no escape, unlike with the Golden Lion. To cover all bases, he also notified the Marine fleet outside. However, he refrained from contacting Marine headquarters for now. He believed they could still handle the situation within Impel Down. With Magellan's orders, all guards grabbed their weapons and stationed themselves at every exit, determined to subdue Sanders. Outside Impel Down, on the deck of the lead warship, a Marine Vice Admiral stood, clad in a grey suit with a justice cloak billowing behind him. A two-headed dragon emblem was etched on his helmet, and he held two swords in hand. At his waist hung an ancient-looking pistol. This man was Vice Admiral Inigamo, the commander of the Marine fleet stationed outside. He puffed on a cigarette, his expression fierce. He had just finished speaking with Warden Magellan via den mushi. As he gazed at the gathering storm clouds above, he muttered to himself. "Is this because of you, Sanders? Seems like being locked in Impel Down didn't weaken you. You've only gotten stronger," he mused. "Vice Admiral Inigamo, should we inform Fleet Admiral Sengoku about Sanders' escape?" his aide asked cautiously. "There's no need for that, at least not yet. Magellan and Shiryu are there. Escaping Impel Down won't be easy," Inigamo responded coolly. "Especially with Magellan. His venom fruit makes him practically invincible inside the prison. Even a Marine Admiral would struggle to escape from him and Shiryu. The venom fruit was incredibly powerful. If not for its side effects, Magellan would have easily been a candidate admiral. Becoming a full admiral wasn't out of the question. Anigamo also respected Shiryu of the Rain, the prison's chief warden, known for his swordsmanship. Anigamo didn't believe he could defeat Shiryu himself. With those two defending the prison, even if Sanders had grown stronger, he wouldn't be able to escape. Therefore, there was no need to alert Fleet Admiral Sengoku just yet. The seas were growing more chaotic, with stronger pirates emerging left and right. Meanwhile, the Marines. Looking up at the darkening storm clouds, Anigamo's thoughts turned to what should have been the Marines' next great leader. Notify all warships, be on high alert and prepare for battle at any moment. Yes, Vice Admiral Anigamo. With the order given, every warship's cannons were trained on the waters surrounding Impel Down. Chapter 6, Ready to Go. Magellan led his men to the 5th level, the freezing hell. After searching for a while, they couldn't find any trace of Sanders. He took out a den mushi and called the prison guards in the monitoring room. Are you certain Sanders is no longer on the 6th level? Absolutely certain. The surveillance den mushi on the 6th level hasn't been destroyed, and we can see every corner clearly. Sanders is definitely not on the 6th level, the guard replied confidently. Magellan glanced at the icy terrain of the 5th level, thought for a moment, and said, continue monitoring all the levels. Report to me immediately if anything happens. Yes, Director Magellan. Magellan continued the search. Deputy Director Han Yabao stayed at the monitoring room. Chief Guard Shiryu was stationed at the passage leading to the 3rd level, a cigar in his mouth, watching the exit with excitement. The entire Impel Down operated like a well-oiled machine, smoothly running under the high alert. And as for Sanders, the eye of the storm. At this moment, he was sitting in the kitchen on the 4th level. This kitchen was right next to the director's office. Long before Magellan headed to the 5th level, Sanders had already reached the 4th. With his advanced observation Haki and the powers of the rumble fruit, he had all the guards and den mushi under his control. He knew exactly where the surveillance devices were and where the guards were stationed. With the speed granted by the rumble fruit, avoiding the surveillance den mushi was a breeze. Magellan would never imagine that a prisoner trying to escape would end up in the prison's kitchen. The 5 chefs in the kitchen looked at Sanders with terror. At their feet lay one of their fellow chefs, wearing a chef's hat. He had been knocked unconscious by Sanders' conqueror's Haki, as a warning to the others. Everyone, stay quiet. Or else, this will be your fate too. Careful, or I'll throw you all into the flames. Sanders sat on a table, pointing at the unconscious chef as he threatened the others. Why yes, we'll be quiet. No noise, we promise, the chef stammered in fear. Sanders nodded in satisfaction. That's more like it. You're working for pennies, no need to risk your lives. Now, get moving and make me some food. Taking a large bite of meat, Sanders ordered the chefs. Since he had decided to fight his way out, he needed to replenish his energy first. Right, we'll cook. We'll get right on it. The chefs were relieved. They had feared the worst, but all he wanted was food. That, they could handle. The 5 chefs immediately got to work, cooking up a storm with impressive skill. One after another, plates of fragrant food were placed in front of Sanders. He didn't hold back, grabbing the food and eating without care, not even waiting for it to cool. As he devoured the food, Sanders spoke with his mouth full, keep cooking, don't stop. I can eat all of it. Faced with the delicious food, Sanders felt like a starving ghost reincarnated. He wanted to eat even the plates. The prison food had been terrible. Worse still, it had been scarce, with small portions to prevent prisoners from gaining the strength to cause trouble. If it weren't for his desire to increase his strength, Sanders would have broken out long ago. More and more food was placed in front of him, but it couldn't keep up with how fast Sanders was eating. Every time a dish was ready, Sanders would pour it directly into his mouth. His body seemed to be an endless pit, consuming vast amounts of food with no visible limit. The chef's hands were getting tired from cooking, and Sanders kept eating more. His body began to change. His strong, over 2-meter-tall frame started to widen. Under the chef's terrified eyes, Sanders gradually transformed into a fat man. His stomach swelled, larger than that of a pregnant woman, like an inflated balloon ready to burst at any moment. When one of the chefs couldn't lift the pot anymore, Sanders finally felt satisfied. Burp. After downing half a bottle of wine, Sanders let out a loud, content burp, a look of satisfaction on his face. 3 years. Finally, real food, Sanders muttered as he smacked his lips. Patting his bulging belly, Sanders used life return, quickly digesting the food he had just consumed. To the chef's horror, his bloated body began to shrink back, gradually returning to its original shape. You all did well. I'm satisfied. Since the food was good, I'll spare your lives. Sanders casually picked his teeth. Thank you. Before the chefs could finish their gratitude, Sanders knocked them all out with his conqueror's haki. Their eyes rolled back as they collapsed to the floor. Now that I've eaten my fill, it's time to get to work. It's time to announce to the world, Sanders is back. Saying this, Sanders left the kitchen and headed toward the 3rd level. This time, he didn't bother avoiding the surveillance den mushy. He walked openly through the 4th level, making his way to the 3rd. His movements were quickly reported to the monitoring room. The guards immediately notified Magellan, who was still on the 5th level. Director Magellan, Sanders has appeared on the 4th level and is heading toward the 3rd level. Chief Jailer City has encountered him with her 4 jailer beasts. Magellan's face darkened as he rushed to the 4th level. At the same time, Sanders stood before 5 opponents. To be precise, 1 person and 4 beasts. The person was a young girl who looked even younger than Sanders. She had curly blonde hair, with her bangs covering her eyes. Her tight-fitting pink leather outfit showed off her curvaceous figure, making her look both sexy and fierce. The 4 beasts, of course, were the jailer beasts. A cow holding a large spiked club, a rhino with 2 smaller clubs, and a koala and a zebra. Seeing Sanders, City smirked. The Navy's genius traitor. I bet your cries of pain will sound delicious. Attack. Capture him. City gave the order without hesitation, not taking Sanders seriously at all. The jailer beasts roared and charged at Sanders, brandishing their weapons. Sanders remained expressionless, his gaze calm and cold. Brilliant blue light began to flicker in his hands, gradually concentrating at his fingertips. 10 million volts thunder strike. Boom. It was as if thunder suddenly exploded beside their ears. A bolt of blue lightning shot out, instantly striking the 4 jailer beasts. Their charging figures froze mid-step. Boom. The tremendous destructive force, accompanied by intense heat and paralysis, blasted the 4 beasts into the air. They crashed heavily to the ground, eyes rolling back as they lost consciousness. City stood there, her mouth agape, unable to believe what she was seeing. The jailer beasts were terrifying creatures, feared even by pirates. Yet in front of this man, they didn't even have a chance to get close. Chapter 7, Little City and Shiryu of the Rain. Facing such a powerful enemy, Little City knew this wasn't the time to be stunned. She quickly snapped back to reality, her face showing a serious expression. The whip in her hand cracked loudly in the air. Excitement of passion red demon whip. Just as Little City was about to execute her move, the man standing at a distance suddenly disappeared from her sight. Her face changed drastically as she tried to step back and evade. Suddenly, a strong, powerful hand gripped her neck. Amidst the sizzling sound, Little City smelled a burnt scent. The stinging pain on her neck told her it was the smell of her skin being scorched by electricity. The paralyzing effect of the current left her unable to resist. The whip slipped from her hand and fell to the ground. So fast. Not a bad figure, and an interesting weapon too. If it were a different time, I might have been interested in playing with you for a while longer. Sanders glanced at Little City's sexy figure and her weapon, smiling as he spoke. But right now, I've got more important things to do. With that, Sanders pinched her neck lightly and then tossed her aside. Boom. A loud crash echoed. Little City's body slammed heavily into the wall, leaving spiderweb-like cracks on the surface. Before she could catch her breath, Sanders casually threw a bolt of lightning at her. Her golden hair was singed black by the lightning, her face covered in soot. She opened her mouth, her eyes rolling back as she fell to the ground, her body trembling a few times as if electrocuted. A thin wisp of black smoke rose from her open mouth. After dealing with Little City and the 4 jailer beasts, Sanders casually strolled toward the 3rd level. In the monitoring room, Han Yabao watched the scene in horror. Sweat dripped from his forehead, his eyes bulging in shock. His normally gloomy, fierce face was now filled with disbelief. So terrifying. Little City and the jailer beasts were defeated in an instant, without any resistance. The other prison guards were also horrified. As the chief jailer of Impel Down, Little City was considered one of the strongest in the entire prison. Not to mention she had 4 powerful jailer beasts with her. But when faced with Sanders, they were defeated without even putting up a fight. A guy this powerful. If he defeats Magellan or escapes from Impel Down, could I become the director and take his place? Han Yabao mumbled to himself. Deputy Director Han Yabao. The guards in the monitoring room stared at him in disbelief. Han Yabao quickly covered his mouth. Oh no, did I say that out loud again? As Sanders made his way to the 3rd level, the sound of footsteps echoed. Dozens of guards with rifles appeared in front of him. There he is, the escapee is here. Quick, notify Director Magellan. Without waiting for orders, the guards raised their rifles and opened fire. Bang bang bang. Countless bullets flew toward Sanders. But Sanders was unafraid. He continued walking as if he didn't see the guards in front of him. In Sanders' eyes, the fast-flying bullets seemed to move in slow motion. With casual movements, he dodged all the bullets. Since the guards knew Sanders possessed a Logia-type power, they had prepared sea stone bullets. So Sanders relied on his observation Haki to avoid them. Of course, he could have used armament Haki or even just taken the bullets head-on, but there was no need. Seeing that the first round of shooting had no effect, the guards prepared for a second round. But Sanders' eyes flashed. A wave of his conqueror's Haki swept over the guards. In the face of his overwhelming aura, the guards were like small boats in a vast tsunami, alone and insignificant. More than half of the guards fell unconscious in an instant. The few who remained stood frozen in fear, unable to move. They wanted to pull the trigger and fight back, but they couldn't. All they could do was watch in despair as Sanders walked closer. After Sanders passed them, those few guards who had been holding on finally collapsed to the ground, their eyes rolling back. Soon, Sanders reached the 3rd level. It seemed that the guards who had just been stationed at the passage were the ones responsible for defending the 3rd level, as only one figure stood there now. The person was tall, wearing the uniform of the chief jailer, with a hat on his head and a sword resting against both hands. His broad-chinned face bore a wicked grin, and the cigar in his mouth released tendrils of smoke. Shiryu. Sanders raised an eyebrow, his expression becoming slightly more serious. In all of Impel Down, only Director Magellan and Chief Jailer Shiryu were worth his attention. Looks like my reputation still carries weight. Even the famous Navy genius has heard of me. Shiryu gripped his sword and slowly approached Sanders. You've killed quite a few pirates over the years, Sanders said with a slight smile. Shiryu had long enjoyed torturing and killing prisoners, and more than a few pirates on the 6th level had met their end at his hands. Has the Navy's former genius started sympathizing with pirates now that you've become a criminal? I don't know how you escaped your cell, but it's time to go back. Maybe this time, the world government will let me execute you. I've killed plenty of pirates and criminals, but I've never killed a Navy officer before. Shiryu taunted as he drew his sword, Thunderstorm, which gleamed coldly. A cruel grin spread across his face, his eyes filled with excitement. I wonder if your screams will sound even better than theirs. Chapter 8, Electromagnetic Force, Crushing Punch. Sanders stood in the passage, curling his lip. He had originally thought that Shiryu would try to join him. He had even been thinking of ways to reject the offer. But now, it seemed like there was no need. Shiryu had no such intentions at all. It was purely Sanders' wishful thinking. You couldn't blame Sanders for thinking this way. After all, in the future, Shiryu would betray Impel Down and join Blackbeard. What Sanders didn't consider was that, at this point in time, his own reputation wasn't that great. His strength wasn't considered top tier in the eyes of most people. Also, Shiryu hadn't yet been imprisoned by Magellan, so his desire to betray was far from strong. Shiryu, why aren't you torturing pirates in the interrogation room? You came all the way here just to die. Sanders mocked without hesitation. Shiryu was momentarily stunned but then responded, don't think that just because you ate a strong devil fruit, you can act so arrogant. I've changed my mind. I'm going to slit your throat with this blade. As he spoke, armament Haki wrapped around Shiryu's sword. With a casual slash, a powerful flying slash attack sped toward Sanders. Lightning flashed in Sanders' eyes. Thanks to his observation Haki, he had already sensed the slash and predicted its trajectory. His body turned into lightning and vanished from where he stood. Boom! The slash created a massive crack in the ground, and the deafening sound echoed throughout the third level. Dust filled the air. 50 million volts thunder strike. Sanders raised his hand, launching a bolt of lightning in retaliation. The blue lightning, carrying a destructive aura, struck Shiryu at lightning speed. Shiryu's eyes narrowed, and he slashed with his armament Haki-coated sword, cutting through the lightning and sending it crashing into the walls on both sides. "If that's all you've got, you won't be escaping today," Shiryu sneered. He kicked off the ground, leaping swiftly toward Sanders, swinging his sword Thunderstorm without hesitation. Facing Shiryu's swift and powerful attacks, Sanders remained calm, a slight smirk forming on his lips. Armament Haki wrapped around his hand, and his left hand, brimming with lightning, extended outward. Electromagnetic force repel. Even though there was still some distance between Sanders' hand and Shiryu's sword, Shiryu felt as though his blade had struck something solid. He couldn't move his sword forward by even an inch. Electromagnetic force repel worked by altering the magnetic field with electric currents, allowing control over metal objects. The rumble fruit had two main directions for development. One was lightning itself, lightning fast speed, destructive attacks, and paralysis effects. The other was electromagnetic force. Enel had used electromagnetic waves to extend the range of his observation Haki, which was part of this. However, Sanders had developed this ability beyond just enhancing his observation Haki. One application was the ability to control metal. By manipulating the magnetic field with electric currents, he could create attraction and repulsion effects. This ability was similar to the magnet fruit, though less convenient as it required a conversion process. At this moment, metals that had come into contact with Sanders' electricity were easier for him to control. While the magnet fruit was superior in terms of controlling magnetic forces, Sanders' rumble fruit was still effective enough for his needs. Since Shiryu had used his sword to cut through Sanders' lightning earlier, the electricity had naturally entered Shiryu's sword. Armament Haki could strengthen defense but didn't entirely block out Sanders' electricity. What kind of power is this? Shiryu was visibly shocked. He could clearly feel that Sanders' hand was repelling his sword. Yet, by his observation, there was no force between Sanders' hand and the blade. It wasn't an externalized form of armament Haki. Since when did the rumble fruit have such abilities? The power of science, Sanders replied as his right hand clenched into a fist, gathering a blindingly bright surge of lightning. 200 million volts thunder fist. Unlike Enel, whose maximum attack was 200 million volts, Sanders wasn't limited to that level. The upper limit of his power went far beyond. With a roar, Sanders unleashed the destructive power of his thunder fist, aiming straight for Shiryu's chest. Shiryu's face changed drastically as he attempted to pull his sword back to block, only to feel the sword being pulled toward Sanders' hand by an attractive force. At the very moment Shiryu tried to retract his blade, Sanders switched from electromagnetic force repel to electromagnetic force attract. The powerful magnetic attraction stalled Shiryu's movement. However, Shiryu reacted quickly. His armament Haki-coated fist shot forward to meet the thunder fist. Boom! With the deafening clash, a powerful shockwave spread out in all directions, raising dust and debris. Shiryu, having hastily blocked the blow, was sent flying instantly. The immense force knocked his sword free from the electromagnetic pull. The thunder fist's power did not diminish as it transformed into a lightning column, continuing to chase after the airborne Shiryu. Crack! Sweat beaded on Shiryu's forehead as he quickly covered his entire body with armament Haki. There was no way his physical body could withstand such tremendous power. The destructive energy carried by the attack gave him the instinctive feeling that one touch would mean death. Boom! The destructive force landed squarely on Shiryu. Even though his body was covered with armament Haki, it couldn't fully resist the power. Shiryu was forced to continuously reinforce his Haki, desperately covering his body in layers of protection. Under the relentless force of the lightning column, Shiryu was blasted back, his body dragging along the ground for over 10 meters before slamming into a wall. Part of the wall collapsed, burying Shiryu under rubble. Thick smoke billowed from the debris. Sanders casually walked toward where Shiryu had fallen. As the dust settled, Shiryu slowly crawled out from the wreckage, his left arm hanging limp and his body charred black. His once pristine uniform was now full of burnt holes, and his previously clean face was covered in soot. He looked at the young man before him in horror. How is he this strong? Chapter 9, Accelerate Action. Shiryu's eyes were full of confusion. His strength definitely surpassed most of the vice admirals of the Marines' headquarters. Only the most elite, seasoned vice admirals could match him, and some of them might not even be his opponents. But even so, when facing the man in front of him, he still felt an overwhelming sense of powerlessness. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. During their recent clash, he had felt an unstoppable power, an ocean-like armament Haki, and the force of a thunderous, destructive lightning. Even now, there was still a force in his left arm continuously destroying his flesh. Shiryu knew that it was the internal destruction ability of advanced armament Haki, a technique he hadn't mastered. Meanwhile, the destructive currents of electricity were still rampaging through his body, paralyzing him and making it difficult to move. The fact that he was even able to stand was him barely holding on. "Not bad, Shiryu. You can still stand," Saunders remarked as he approached Shiryu, surprised that he was still able to stand. The power of that punch had been quite impressive. A typical vice admiral would be lucky not to die after taking a punch head-on. Saunders knew this too well, having sparred with vice admirals many times before entering Impel Down. At that time, aside from the veteran vice admirals, the others might not have been able to match him. Admirals and vice admirals were entirely different classes of beings. A vice admiral who could take a full force attack from an admiral was considered one of the elites. In the original series, Luffy, after defeating Doflamingo, was taken down in one hit by Kaido. Who could say Luffy wasn't strong enough to defeat vice admirals by that time? Saunders wasn't saying he was stronger than Kaido right now, but he was at least on the same level. If they were to fight, it would take days to determine the winner. His victory over Shiryu had been somewhat opportunistic. Electromagnetic force had caught Shiryu off guard, and he hadn't even had the chance to display his full swordsmanship. Forcing a swordsman to trade punches was a bit unfair, especially given the hastiness of the clash. "You're truly a monster, Saunders," Shiryu coughed a couple of times, using his sword for support, panting heavily. "After 3 years in Impel Down, not only has your strength not diminished, but you've grown to such a level. No wonder you're called the most talented monster in Marines history. It seems the Marines and the world government have no idea what kind of enemy they've provoked." Despite only having exchanged a single blow, Shiryu felt more exhausted than if he had fought for 3 days and nights. Now he was certain, Saunders was definitely going to escape from Impel Down. Magellan would never be able to stop him. No wonder Saunders had been moving so slowly earlier, even finding the time to eat. He must have already been certain of his success. When Saunders had left the kitchen and moved toward the 3rd level, the surveillance room had already traced his steps and informed Shiryu, who was guarding the 3rd floor. "I originally planned to stay in the Marines to fight pirates," Saunders said with a shrug. "But those swine killed my foster father." If his foster father hadn't been murdered, Saunders wouldn't have minded staying in the Marines, for the sake of his foster father and his mentor, Zephyr. At worst, he could have refused promotion to Admiral and found a position at some Marines base. He wasn't a savior. He couldn't take on all the world's injustice and suffering. The best he could do was to fight more of the brutal pirates within his reach. "If I were one of the 5 elders, I would have had that celestial dragon's head delivered to you on a platter rather than forcing an arrest order when you hadn't even made a move," Shiryu said, glancing at Saunders. "One celestial dragon isn't worth even a fraction of your value." Shiryu already knew about Saunders' situation. He had heard the pirates on the 6th floor talk about it before, many of them mocking Saunders' predicament. As the chief jailer of Impel Down, it wasn't surprising that Shiryu knew about these things. Saunders' story wasn't widely known outside of the prison, even within the Marines. Except for Sengoku and Kizaru, others probably believed Saunders had actually tried to assassinate a celestial dragon. In reality, Saunders hadn't even laid eyes on the celestial dragon before Sengoku and Kizaru were sent to arrest him. At the time, Saunders had even wanted to call the police. He couldn't believe he had been charged with a crime without even doing anything. Perhaps that was why the 5 elders had sent CP0 as overseers, afraid that Sengoku and Kizaru would show mercy. It was likely that this was all a loyalty test for the Marines. "It's a pity," Saunders shrugged, "that after 800 years of ruling the world, the celestial dragons have become so arrogant that they no longer respect power." Thunder began to gather at Saunders' fingertips. Without hesitation, he unleashed it on Shiryu. This time, he didn't go all out, using only 50 million volts. Whether Shiryu lived or died would depend on his own fate. The lightning struck Shiryu, and the sizzling sound of burning flesh filled the air. A charred smell emanated from his body as his muscles twitched involuntarily. He let out a pained groan. Under the dazzling flash of lightning, Shiryu's body was outlined in a skeletal silhouette. Ugh, ah! After delivering the lightning strike, Saunders turned and walked away. His pace wasn't as leisurely as before. Now that his strength had been revealed, if Magellan wasn't foolish, he would likely have already called for reinforcements from Marines headquarters. Saunders needed to speed up. He wasn't afraid if the Marines sent one Admiral. But if they sent two, and teamed up with Magellan at Impel Down, well, he wouldn't stand a chance. Chapter 10, A Roller Coaster of Events, Sengoku in Shock. In the first floor surveillance room. Yes. Warden Shiryu has blocked Sanders. Sanders is strong, but the Warden is very powerful too. At the very least, he can hold him off until Director Magellan arrives. Though Shiryu is scary and often enjoys torturing prisoners, he's reliable in a fight. Sanders is too young, not even 20. He can't possibly be a match for Warden Shiryu. The Thunder Kid's prison break ends here. As expected from Warden Shiryu, what a powerful slash. Even the lightning from the Thunder Fruit was cut through. Warden Shiryu is charging in. Go, Warden Shiryu. Show Sanders what the top-tier strength of Impel Down is like. Wait, Warden Shiryu got hit with a single punch. In just a few seconds, the guards in the surveillance room experienced a roller coaster of emotions. The second most powerful force in Impel Down, their much-anticipated Warden Shiryu, was sent flying with just one punch from Sanders. The ferocity of the thunderbolt alone was enough to make the guards tremble, and Shiryu had taken the full brunt of it. Shiryu is standing up. Han Yabao's face was filled with fear as he stared at the disheveled figure of Shiryu on the monitor. No way. Warden Shiryu, lost. Looking at the battered Shiryu, none of the guards could believe it. The Warden had been defeated by a single blow from that Logia-type Devil Fruit user. It's terrifying. How could such a monstrous creature exist? This is the Marine's most talented monster? It's terrifying. Everyone was in shock, their faces pale with fear. Can Director Magellan defeat him? Of course, Director Magellan can beat him. The Venom Fruit user is invincible in Impel Down. No one can resist his poison. Once they're touched by it, they're done. One of the guards loudly reassured himself, convinced that Magellan was invincible within Impel Down. However, this time, few people echoed his confidence. Magellan was indeed strong, but could he really defeat Shiryu in just one punch? It had only taken a single punch. Sanders still looked relaxed, as if he hadn't even used his full strength. Hurry up and inform Magellan. Shiryu has been defeated, tell him to intercept Sanders quickly. Han Yabao was the first to snap out of his shock, quickly ordering the guards to notify Magellan. Damn it! As the director of Impel Down, why isn't he here in a critical moment like this? I should be the director instead. Han Yabao muttered under his breath. The guards were long used to the deputy director coveting the director's position, so they pretended not to hear him. Soon, Magellan received the news of Shiryu's defeat. He was standing next to City-chan at the time, instructing Impel Down's doctors to treat her injuries. You said Shiryu was defeated by Sanders with one punch? Magellan asked, his face heavy with concern. Though he didn't like Shiryu's habit of torturing prisoners, he still respected Shiryu's strength. Yes, Director Magellan. Warden Shiryu was defeated by one punch. Sanders is now heading to the second level. I understand. Magellan hung up the phone and quickly headed for the elevator. Going to the third level now would mean chasing after Sanders. Instead, Magellan planned to use the elevator to get to the first level ahead of him and block his escape there. As he walked, Magellan informed Vice Admiral Inigamo of the situation outside and then placed a call to Marine headquarters for reinforcements. The power that Sanders had demonstrated had reached a level where Magellan had no choice but to ask for help. He didn't feel ashamed to ask for reinforcements. What mattered most was keeping the criminals imprisoned in Impel Down. At Marine headquarters, current Fleet Admiral Sengoku sat in his office reviewing documents. He wore a pair of round glasses, and his long beard was braided into a rope-like shape. A plaque with the words "Justice Reigns Supreme" hung solemnly on the wall behind him. Every time Sengoku finished reading a document, he would hand it to the goat beside him, which would chew on it and eat the paper. Buru buru buru. The den mushi rang. This is Marine headquarters. Sengoku speaking. This is Magellan, director of Impel Down. The prisoner Sanders from level 6 has broken out. Warden Shiryu has been defeated. Please send reinforcements immediately, Fleet Admiral Sengoku. Magellan spoke rapidly, explaining the situation clearly. Who did you say broke out? Sengoku stood up from his chair, his face instantly turning serious. The goat beside him even looked over in surprise. Former Marine Rear Admiral and Logia-type Thunder Fruit user, Sanders. Hearing the name again, Sengoku was momentarily transported back to that fateful afternoon, the day when that marine prodigy had desperately tried to escape from him and Kizaru's siege. I see. Has anyone else escaped from Impel Down? No, it's just Sanders. However, his strength is overwhelming. Warden Shiryu was defeated with a single blow. Please send a Marine Admiral for support. Fearing that Marine headquarters might underestimate the threat, Magellan emphasized Shiryu's defeat, urging Sengoku to dispatch an admiral to assist. I will send an admiral with a fleet immediately. Sengoku hung up the phone, but the heavy and shocked expression on his face did not fade. Shiryu, the warden of Impel Down, had been defeated with a single punch. That prodigy, who had once shocked the Marines with his talent, had now grown to such an astonishing level. But no matter how much Sanders had grown, he had to be suppressed again. There was no way they could allow Sanders to escape. The world was already in enough chaos. Young, powerful pirates were emerging one after another. If Sanders returned to the seas, the world would become even more chaotic. Sengoku could not permit that. Chapter 11, Admiral on the move, Magellan blocks the way. Sakazuki, head to Impel Down immediately. Sanders has broken out of prison. I've already mobilized the fleet. You must suppress Sanders again, and if necessary, eliminate him. We cannot allow him to return to the seas. Sengoku made the call to Admiral Kizaru. At present, Marine headquarters only had Kizaru available as an active Admiral-level force. As Fleet Admiral, Sengoku had to stay stationed at Marine headquarters. Akainu was in the New World, Aokiji was off who knows where, and Garp was also absent from headquarters. Moreover, Kizaru's glint fruit ability would allow him to reach Impel Down quickly. Sanders, hey? How terrifying! This junior actually broke out of level 6? Truly scary. Kizaru, wearing his signature sunglasses and a yellow striped suit with a purple tie, paused mid-trim of his nails. His usually mischievous expression turned serious upon hearing about Sanders' escape. I understand, Fleet Admiral Sengoku. Kizaru rose from his chair and began walking quickly, his justice coat fluttering behind him. Kizaru and Sengoku knew Sanders better than anyone else. 3 years ago, it had been both of them who apprehended Sanders. Kizaru vividly remembered that battle. He knew full well how powerful Sanders was, having come from Zephyr's elite training camp. At just 16, Sanders had the strength to rival an elite vice admiral. If the power gap between a vice admiral and an admiral weren't so vast, and if Kizaru hadn't been assisting on the side, Sanders might have actually escaped from Sengoku back then using the speed of his thunder fruit. Looking at the entire Marine force, aside from Sengoku, Kizaru was probably the last person who wanted Sanders to escape. After all, Kizaru's ideal was to do just enough to earn his paycheck. If Sanders returned to the seas, he would certainly come after Kizaru, making his life much more complicated. Junior, the sea is too dangerous. You should stay in Impel Down. With the Fleet Admiral's orders, the Marines began to mobilize. A large fleet of warships set sail in the direction of Impel Down, though many Marines had no idea what was happening. At Impel Down, after defeating Shiryu, Sanders rushed toward the first level. Along the way, aside from occasionally running into some guards, he didn't face much resistance. When he reached the first level, Sanders saw a towering figure standing there, as if waiting for him. In the dim light, Sanders could make out the figure's appearance. The man was enormous, at least twice the height of Sanders, with a fearsome look. He resembled the legendary demon, Satan, with 2 horns on his head and bat-like wings emerging from his black prison warden uniform. This man was none other than Magellan, the warden of Impel Down and a paramecia-type venom fruit user. So that's why I didn't encounter many people along the way. You must have sent them away, Sanders said as he approached Magellan, smiling. Against a criminal as powerful as you, having others here would only result in needless casualties, Magellan replied gravely. As he spoke, purple poisonous mist continuously emitted from his mouth and nose, making the already dimly lit scene appear even more eerie and terrifying. Criminal? What crime have I committed? Sanders chuckled. Though he had only served in the Marines for 2 years, he had made significant contributions by taking down many pirates. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been awarded the rank of Rear Admiral. At that time, the Marines weren't promoting people based purely on strength, merit was required as well. Magellan remained silent for a moment. He knew a bit about the dirty dealings of the world government and the Marines, but that wasn't his concern. His duty was to guard Impel Down and ensure that no prisoner escaped. This ends here, Sanders. Magellan's eyes were resolute. I won't let you escape Impel Down. As he spoke, thick, viscous purple liquid began oozing from Magellan's body. Gurgle. The sound was like flowing water, or perhaps boiling soup. The toxic liquid spread across the floor, instantly corroding it as if sulfuric acid had been poured onto the ground. The liquid quickly pooled, and the air was soon filled with noxious fumes. Soon, Magellan's entire body was covered in the venom, and behind him, the venom began to form into 3 massive dragons. It was Magellan's signature move, the Poison Dragon. Knowing that Sanders had defeated Shiryu, Magellan didn't dare to underestimate him. He went straight for his strongest move. Seeing this, Sanders' face became serious, his gaze filled with caution. Magellan was one of the reasons Sanders hadn't rushed to escape Impel Down. In such a confined space, the venom fruit gave Magellan a massive advantage. Armament Haki engage. Sanders activated his armament Haki, covering his entire body with it. The dense, continuous flow of Haki acted like armor, protecting him. He even sealed off his pores to prevent the poison gas from seeping in. He held his breath to avoid inhaling any poison. With lightning surging around his body and his eyes sparking with electricity, Sanders looked like the god of thunder descending to earth. Bolts of electricity flickered across the first level, filling the air with the crackling sound of static. Sanders, accept your punishment. Magellan shouted. Poison Dragon. Chapter 12, Fierce Battle with Magellan, Armament Haki released. Stay here, Sanders. Poison Dragon. Magellan roared as the poisonous dragons behind him reared up, charging toward Sanders with a rush of toxic fumes. Sanders summoned the power of the Thunder Fruit, and a massive surge of lightning formed before him. In an instant, the lightning transformed into a colossal blue and white dragon. This Thunder Dragon crackled with energy, its scales seemingly visible in the electric glow. 200 million volts Thunder Dragon. Boom! With a deafening clap of thunder, the Thunder Dragon surged forward, crashing headlong into the Poison Dragon. As the two forces collided in midair, the resulting shockwave sent ripples through the air. The terrifying heat from the Thunder Dragon's 200 million volts quickly evaporated the viscous poison coating Magellan's dragon. The stench of scorched venom filled the air, and the poisonous mist that formed was instantly neutralized by the powerful electric currents. Seeing this, Sanders relaxed slightly, finally exhaling a breath. Lightning, it seemed, could counter some of the poison's effects. This allowed him to be less cautious. Magellan, it seems your poison isn't all that impressive. No matter how deadly the venom was, it came from within Magellan's body. The intense heat produced by lightning was more than enough to neutralize it. With that said, Sanders' body flared with an even greater intensity of lightning. Countless bolts of electricity filled the first level of Impel Down, dispersing the lingering poison mist completely. Magellan noticed this, but his expression remained unchanged. In a cold voice, he said, "Don't underestimate me, Sanders." The 2 remaining poison dragons, flanking him from either side, rushed at Sanders with terrifying speed. In the blink of an eye, they were right in front of Sanders. The dragons raised their heads, jaws gaping wide as if to swallow him whole. Sizzle, sizzle. With the sound of crackling electricity, Sanders vanished from where he stood. The poison dragon slammed into the ground, leaving a gaping hole. Sanders reappeared off to the left, but before he could counterattack, the second poison dragon came roaring toward him. In another instant, Sanders disappeared once again. Magellan's poison dragons continued their relentless pursuit, but Sanders remained elusive, dodging their attacks effortlessly as he moved across the first level, seemingly unbothered. Magellan, your poison dragons are too slow. I can appear anywhere lightning exists. Thunder Flash, a dodge technique Sanders had developed, allowing him to appear instantly wherever his lightning touched. The battlefield was now filled with his lightning, meaning Sanders could teleport to any point at will. Magellan's poison dragons were indeed formidable, but their speed couldn't keep up. Even with Magellan's observation Haki predicting Sanders' movements, the dragons couldn't react fast enough to catch him. Unless Magellan had developed his observation Haki to the level where he could briefly foresee the future, he had no hope of closing the gap. But it was clear that Magellan's observation Haki wasn't that advanced. His expression grew grim, but he remained silent. He knew that defeating Sanders alone would be ideal, but even if he couldn't, stalling for time until reinforcements arrived was a valid strategy. The Thunder Fruit's ability was too overwhelming. Sanders moved at the speed of lightning, or rather, he was lightning itself. Magellan's poison dragons couldn't land a hit, and they moved like headless chickens, chasing after him in vain. Seeing this, Sanders understood what Magellan was planning. His figure flickered, and suddenly, he appeared directly in front of Magellan. It was time to end this quickly. If Magellan wasn't dealt with soon, marine reinforcements would arrive. Sanders clenched his fists, preparing to strike. Armament Haki release. A surge of powerful armament Haki burst from Sanders' body, coating his fists in a solid layer of Haki. This was an advanced application of armament Haki, emission. By allowing the flow of Haki outside the body, it could be projected as both an offensive and defensive force. Sanders had an immense reserve of Haki, similar to Douglas bullets, and releasing some of it to serve as a weapon or shield against Magellan's venom was no challenge. Seeing Sanders charge at him, seemingly intent on close combat, Magellan was not afraid. In fact, he was thrilled. The strength of the venom fruit lay in the poison itself, and for it to be effective, it needed to enter the opponent's body. Close combat was the most advantageous for him. No matter how strong one's armament Haki was, it couldn't fully protect them. The mouth, nose, eyes, and ears were difficult to cover with Haki, making them vulnerable to poison. "Come on, Sanders. Let's see if you dare touch me," Magellan taunted. Sanders' muscular arms bulged with raw power, and the terrifying energy within them was palpable. 200 million volts thunder fist. With the force of destruction, Sanders' fist shot toward Magellan's chest. Sizzle. Magellan crossed his arms in front of his chest, coating them with armament Haki in a defensive stance. But as soon as the two forces made contact, Magellan's expression shifted dramatically. The overwhelming power of Sanders' punch sent him flying backward. Magellan tried to brace himself, his legs digging into the ground in an attempt to resist the impact. Deep grooves formed beneath his feet as he slid back for dozens of meters before finally coming to a stop. What terrifying strength! Is this the same power that defeated Shiryu? Magellan's arms were scorched black, his sleeves in tatters. His warden's uniform was in ruins, and his hair had been singed into curls by the electricity. He stared at Sanders, the thunder-wielding figure before him, with shock in his eyes. It was hard to imagine the sheer talent required to attain this level of strength, even after being confined in level 6 of Impel Down. Impel Down wasn't a charity. Prisoners in level 6 weren't even given enough food to stay strong. And yet, Sanders had managed to grow significantly stronger in such harsh conditions. What would he be capable of if he were free in the outside world? Magellan dared not even imagine. Moreover, poison had no effect on this man. Magellan glanced at Sanders' unharmed arm, his heart sinking. The punch just now had utilized flowing armament Haki, a technique that kept the lightning from touching any of the venom. What a terrifying opponent! To think he had trained his armament Haki to such a degree while imprisoned in Impel Down. Chapter 13, The Arrival of the 500 million volt Thunder God. You're indeed the Warden of Impel Down, far stronger than Shiryu. After a brief exchange of blows, Sanders was sure that Magellan, who wielded the venom fruit, definitely had the strength of an admiral. Unfortunately, the fruit's side effects were too significant. Magellan spent nearly 10 hours every day on the toilet due to severe diarrhea. "If that's all you've got, you won't be able to stop me, Magellan," Sanders said. The top-tier armament Haki gave Sanders a constant stream of power, forming an invisible protective layer on his body. Magellan's poison couldn't touch his skin, and the high temperatures generated by his lightning could burn away the toxins. Sanders had no fear of engaging with Magellan since the venom fruit's abilities were completely countered. "Don't underestimate me, Sanders." Magellan's face darkened as he shouted in anger. His eyes turned blood red, and terrifying venom gushed from his body. This time, the venom wasn't the usual purple color, it was a lava-like, bright red liquid. In no time, the red venom coalesced in front of Magellan, forming a massive skeleton giant. The giant bore a 7 or 8 point resemblance to Magellan himself. Clearly, Magellan had modeled this form after his own image. Sanders' expression became serious. He knew that Magellan was pulling out all the stops with this move. The red venom giant was Magellan's ultimate ability, a special type of poison. Any substance that came into contact with it would be infected and gradually corroded until it was completely destroyed. A person who touched it would suffer the same fate, with the poison spreading until death. 500 million volt thunder god. Sanders wasn't taking any chances and activated his own ultimate move. He summoned all the lightning within him, and a dazzling light filled the space. His entire body transformed into pure lightning. His hair turned blue-white, standing upright as if he were a super scion. Unlike his normal state of being made of electricity, his body now had a solid, tangible quality to it. Lightning flowed over his body like liquid, and his demeanor was solemn and divine, like a thunder god descending to earth. Every movement radiated destructive power, and the air around him twisted, as if space itself might tear apart under the immense force. Hell's Judgment Venom Giant! Magellan roared. The red venom giant raised its massive arm and swung it down at Sanders with crushing force. Sanders didn't flinch and raised his fist to meet the attack. The large and small arms collided. Despite the size difference, the sheer power of Sanders in his thunder god state was overwhelming, with each punch carrying the force of hundreds of millions of volts. As soon as the red venom touched his body, it was instantly incinerated by the extreme heat of the lightning. Sanders unleashed punch after punch, rendering the giant helpless under his relentless assault. The speed difference was too great. In the confined spaces of Impel Down, the Venom Fruit's abilities gave Magellan a significant advantage, but against the incredible speed of the Thunder Fruit, his giant poison soldier was nothing more than a cumbersome puppet, easily played with by Sanders. The mighty giant was quickly torn apart under Sanders' barrage, with the red venom splattering and corroding the floors and walls of Impel Down. After dismantling the giant, Sanders flashed forward and appeared right in front of Magellan, his fist aiming straight for the Warden's chest. Seeing that his fruit's abilities no longer posed a threat, Magellan had no choice but to fight Sanders head-on. Armament Haki enveloped his fist as he raised his arms in defense. The sound of fists colliding echoed throughout the first level of Impel Down. The prison guards huddled in the monitoring room, trembling in fear as they stared at the screens. They couldn't believe what they were seeing. Magellan's venom fruit, which had always been invincible, was now completely ineffective against Sanders. "This is terrifying," one guard muttered. "Magellan's venom fruit has no effect at all," another guard said. "That power can kill even the most dangerous pirates." Hanyabal, Impel Down's deputy warden, was shaking as he muttered under his breath. It was his first time seeing someone immune to Magellan's deadly poison. Although he often looked down on Magellan for constantly being stuck on the toilet, Hanyabal still deeply respected his strength. Without Magellan's deterrent presence, the dangerous criminals in Impel Down would have long since caused chaos. But now, this terrifying force was being utterly defeated by Sanders. "Deputy Warden Hanyabal, should we go and assist Warden Magellan?" a guard suggested, trembling. Hanyabal broke out in a cold sweat and quickly covered his mouth to avoid blurting out that he was too scared to go. He was indeed a man of justice, but he wasn't a fool. He knew that not only would he be useless against Sanders, but Magellan's poison, which spread during the fight, would kill him before Sanders even got a chance. This was why Magellan had chosen to confront Sanders alone. If other guards had joined, Magellan's own poison would have wiped them out. Clearing his throat, Hanyabal put on a righteous face and said, "We need to notify the Navy of the situation as quickly as possible and request reinforcements." With that, he changed the subject and grabbed a Den Mushi to contact the Navy fleet outside Impel Down. Meanwhile, Sanders continued to battle Magellan. Cloaked in lightning, Sanders fought like a god of destruction, relentlessly driving Magellan back. They fought from the first level of the prison all the way to the outer layer by the sea. Along the way, buildings were destroyed, leaving behind rubble and ruin. The entire prison seemed to shake under the force of their clash. Outmatched, Magellan gasped for breath as he desperately fought back against Sanders' overwhelming attacks. With his venom fruit's abilities neutralized, he had no choice but to rely on hand-to-hand combat and Haki, but in both areas, Sanders held the upper hand. With his mighty armament Haki and the immense physical power of a giant, Sanders was unstoppable. Growing more exhilarated with each blow, Sanders grinned with excitement. After 3 years in prison, finally having a worthy opponent made his blood pump faster. How could he not be thrilled? "This is the end for you, Magellan!" Sanders shouted. 500 million volt Thunder God's Spear. With a triumphant roar, a spear made of pure lightning materialized in Sanders' hand. He thrust it forward, aiming straight for Magellan. Chapter 14, Defeating Magellan, Fusion Fruit Successfully Developed. Feeling the power contained within the giant spear in Sanders' hand, Magellan's expression turned serious. He didn't dare be careless, and immediately pushed his armament Haki to its peak, covering his arms, preparing to defend. However, a sly grin tugged at the corner of Sanders' lips as he revealed the success of his strategy. Thunder flash! In an instant, Sanders disappeared from where he stood, and in the blink of an eye, he was already above Magellan, poised for a strike. Damn it! Seeing Sanders vanish from sight, Magellan's expression shifted dramatically. His observation Haki quickly detected Sanders' location, but it was too late for him to react. It's over, Magellan. With a swift, merciless motion, Sanders drove his electrifying spear toward the back of Magellan's head. Unable to turn in time, Magellan could only wrap his head in armament Haki. Boom! The terrifying force struck Magellan, sending him flying through the air without any resistance. The devastating lightning shattered his armament Haki, quickly breaking through his defense and slamming into the back of his skull. Magellan, still airborne, rolled his eyes back and lost consciousness. His large body crashed to the ground like a rag doll, bounced once, then lay still among the ruins. Phew! Sanders exhaled deeply. He released the Thunder God Descent form, revealing his muscular physique. At this point, his upper clothing was entirely shredded, and even the pants he wore were tattered and torn. Magellan didn't fare any better. The once imposing Warden's uniform was nothing but fragments, with only a few scraps of cloth clinging to his body. Glancing at the unmoving Magellan, Sanders turned and left. The greatest obstacle in Impel Down had been defeated. It was time to escape the prison and return to the seas. At that moment, a voice echoed in his mind. His paramecia-type fusion fruit had finally evolved successfully. With ease, Sanders equipped the fish fruit, mythical Zoan model, Azure Dragon. This had been part of his plan all along. He knew how powerful the mythical Zoan types were from reading the manga. With the Azure Dragon fruit, his physical strength would skyrocket once more, and his defensive capabilities would also increase. His power would reach new heights again. Most importantly, he wanted to experience firsthand the kind of education Kaido-sensei provided. Who knows, maybe getting hit a few times would improve the rest of his Haki to the highest level as well. After making these adjustments, Sanders walked toward the great gate of the first level above the sea. Passing through this door would mark his complete escape from Impel Down. Meanwhile, outside Impel Down, the Marine fleet was ready for battle. Vice Admiral Inigamo had already drawn his twin swords, prepared for a fight. Just moments ago, the Impel Down Vice Warden had notified him that Warden Magellan had been defeated by Sanders. Shocked, Inigamo immediately ordered the fleet to be on alert. Cannons pointed directly at the exit, ready to fire the moment Sanders emerged and deliver a heavy blow to the escapee. Although Inigamo knew the cannonballs might not harm Sanders, any delay they could cause would be beneficial. Fleet Admiral Sengoku had already informed him that Admiral Kizaru and reinforcements were on their way, including several Vice Admirals from Marine headquarters. Vice Admiral Inigamo, all bullets and cannonballs have been replaced with sea prism stone rounds. We're ready to fire at any time. The lieutenant approached Inigamo and reported. I understand, Inigamo responded casually, his eyes never leaving the exit of Impel Down. Against Logia-type fruit users, aside from armament Haki, sea prism stone was the only effective tool. This was why Inigamo had ordered all non-Haki using Marines to arm themselves with sea prism stone weapons. The clouds in the sky were growing thicker. The sound of thunder echoed more frequently. Countless bolts of lightning snaked through the clouds, creating a suffocating tension that made the Marines on the ships increasingly nervous. Boom! Lightning flashed. A bolt of electricity illuminated the sky above Impel Down, briefly lighting up the sea. In the dim light, Inigamo saw a figure slowly walking out from the massive gate. The figure was tall and muscular. His upper body was bare, with bulging muscles exuding an intense sense of strength. Sanders. Inigamo narrowed his eyes, recognizing the figure immediately. The man before him was even more imposing than 3 years ago. Inigamo's expression was complex. The person in front of him had once been the pride of the Marines, an idol to countless low-ranking soldiers, and a leader among the younger generation of Marines. Now, however, he was their enemy. 3 years ago, the news of Sanders, the wielder of the Rumble fruit, betraying the Marines had left many confused. Many Marines who held justice in their hearts couldn't understand why a promising rear admiral like Sanders would choose to defect. While the matter had been ordered by the world government and fleet admiral to never be discussed, some higher UPS in the Marines had their suspicions. Sanders' adoptive father had died shortly before his capture, and though the details were unclear and the world government had covered it up, it wasn't hard to imagine that his death wasn't as simple as the government's statement of, attacked by pirates and fatally wounded. Anigamo wasn't the only one with a complicated expression. Many on the Marine ships felt the same. 3 years hadn't been enough to erase the memory of the brilliant genius who had once stunned Marine headquarters. Everyone, prepare yourselves. The target has appeared. Anigamo took a deep breath, his expression hardening. No matter what happened before, Sanders was now their enemy. Fire. Chapter 15, Divine Punishment. The destruction of the fleet. Countless cannonballs were fired from the cannons, aimed at Sanders' position. Every movement of the Marine fleet had long been under Sanders' observation. Before the cannonballs could reach him, Sanders vanished from his spot. The next moment, he appeared above the Marine fleet. Boom! 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 The power of the cannonballs obliterated the gate of Impel Down. Anigamo. Sanders raised an eyebrow as he spotted the Vice Admiral standing on the deck of the lead warship. He knew Anigamo fairly well. Technically, when Sanders was still in the Marines, he was part of the hawkish faction. He showed no mercy when dealing with pirates, often sinking both the pirate crew and their ships into the sea. In the first half of the Grand Line, Sanders had wiped out countless pirate crews. The number of pirates who perished at his hands was so vast that even he couldn't recall the total. He never took prisoners, and while his ruthless methods displeased many, they greatly satisfied others, especially those in the hawkish faction led by Akainu. Of course, unlike Akainu or Anigamo, Sanders didn't sacrifice the lives of his subordinates just to kill pirates. Sanders, you can't escape. Anigamo showed no sign of wanting to reminisce with Sanders. Everyone, continue the attack. Cannons were readjusted, and the Marines aboard the warships raised their guns. Bullets and cannonballs were once again fired toward Sanders, who remained in midair. Tisk, Sanders clicked his tongue. While effortlessly dodging the bullets and cannonballs, he laughed and said, "After all these years, is this how you greet an old friend?" With his observation Haki fully active, none of the projectiles came close to harming him. Anigamo watched Sanders continue to flicker in and out of view in the air, his expression growing darker. There's nothing to say to a criminal. Anigamo pulled out several more swords, his hair extending like tendrils to grip the blades. He now looked like a spider, with 8 legs. True. There's really nothing to discuss, Sanders nodded, his expression turning cold. Sparks of lightning danced in his eyes. In the sky, the lightning within the dark clouds grew even more violent, snakes of electricity writhing and seemingly ready to unleash divine punishment at any moment. Sanders' eyes suddenly widened. His conqueror's Haki surged. A vast, overwhelming presence erupted from his body and spread outward, gradually enveloping the entire Marine fleet. The mighty force shook the sails of the warships like a storm. On board the ships, the Marines aiming their guns at Sanders suddenly felt a chilling sensation, as if they had been marked by an unstoppable beast. In the next moment, the majority of the Marines rolled their eyes and collapsed, their weapons slipping from their hands. What's happening? Why are they all falling? What's going on? The remaining conscious Marines, trembling in fear, looked at their fallen comrades in horror. Conqueror's Haki. Anigamo squeezed out the words as he struggled to resist the overwhelming pressure emanating from Sanders. Compared to the other Marines, the pressure on him was far greater. How, when did he? Anigamo looked up at the figure floating in midair. He couldn't understand how Sanders suddenly possessed Conqueror's Haki. There had been no sign of it when he was in the Marines. Moreover, the sheer intensity of this Conqueror's Haki was something Anigamo had only felt from the strongest individuals in the world. The surging pressure seemed ready to crush him, a Marine Vice Admiral. Boom! Thunder roared, and a flash of lightning illuminated Sanders' figure. With dark clouds and bolts of electricity as his backdrop, Sanders looked like a god of destruction. Anigamo, there's still a lot you don't know, Sanders remarked coldly, surrounded by a storm of silver lightning. He glanced at the surrounding warships, then raised his hands. The clouds in the sky seemed to respond to his movements. Crack! A bolt of lightning fell from the dark clouds, striking one of the warships. The main mast was shattered, crashing down onto the deck, sending the Marines on board scrambling for cover. The mast is down! They cried in panic. The second bolt of lightning struck, followed by a third. One after another, the warships were battered by lightning strikes. In the blink of an eye, the ships were teetering, ready to sink at any moment. A sense of destruction loomed over the fleet as more and more ships were enveloped by the relentless storm. Divine punishment had descended. Outside of Impel Down was Sanders' domain. The Marines on board the ship stared in horror at the spectacle before them. My God! Sanders is controlling the lightning to attack the fleet. Panic and fear spread rapidly among the Marines. Vice Admiral Anigamo, do something. This is the calm belt. There are sea kings below us. Terrified cries rang out. Anywhere else, falling into the water might not have been so bad. Every Marine was a capable swimmer, and they could rely on the wreckage to stay afloat until reinforcements arrived. But this was the calm belt. Anyone who fell into the water here would be a snack for the sea kings. Not everyone was capable of handling those terrifying sea monsters. Damn you, Sanders! Anigamo's face twisted in anger as he watched the fleet fall to pieces under the assault of lightning. He didn't care about sacrificing subordinates to capture pirates, but this kind of death was utterly meaningless. He gripped his swords tightly, bent his knees slightly, and leapt into the air, using Jeppo, one of the Rokushiki techniques, to step on the air and propel himself toward Sanders. With his skill in Jeppo, along with his mastery of life returned to wield multiple swords, Anigamo had honed his air mobility to perfection. Stop this, Sanders! Anigamo yelled as he unleashed a flying slash. Sanders easily dodged the attack, not stopping his actions. Anigamo, I'm a criminal, remember? Sanders smirked. What right do you have to order me to stop? There's nothing to discuss between me and the Marines. As more and more bolts of lightning struck the fleet, the warships were shattered one after another, leaving wreckage floating in the sea. Numerous Marines fell into the water. Fortunately, the Sea Kings had retreated to the depths of the calm belt for now, or else the fallen Marines would have been nothing more than appetizers. Chapter 16, Destroy the Fleet, Depart. Anigamo remained silent. He stepped forward with a moonwalk toward Sanders. 8 long knives wrapped in armament Haki slashed at Sanders. Without fear, Sanders met the attack with his arms wrapped in armament Haki. At the moment the long knives came slashing down, he effortlessly grabbed one of the blades. The sharp edge had no effect on him. With a sudden pull, he brought Anigamo in front of him. 200 million volts, Thunder Fist. A fist carrying the power of furious thunder struck Anigamo right in the face. Anigamo's face twisted instantly, and several teeth flew out. The raging thunder burned his face black, and his helmet turned to ashes in an instant. He was sent flying backward. He crashed heavily onto the warship he was on. The large warship's deck was instantly smashed open. Anigamo was smashed into the depths of the sea, disappearing without a trace. Vice Admiral Anigamo of Marine Headquarters stood no chance against Sanders. Vice Admiral Anigamo. The Vice Admiral has been defeated. On the warship, the officers and Marines were visibly shocked. They knew Sanders had broken out of Impel Down. But they had little concept of how strong he was. Now, with a single blow, Sanders had defeated Vice Admiral Anigamo. They truly felt the strength of Sanders. The Marines present couldn't help but drop their jaws. Each of them turned pale, speechless from the shock. Seeing the destructive thunder wrapped around Sanders, their faces were filled with terror and anxiety, their scalps tingling, and cold sweat streaming down their foreheads. Was this really the Rear Admiral Sanders they had known before, with such overwhelming strength? Only the 3 admirals of the Marines could achieve such a feat. Had he been training during those 3 years in Impel Down? For a moment, everyone was left wondering whether Impel Down was truly a hellish prison or a sanctuary for training. There was no reason for a prisoner to become this strong in just 3 years. After sending Anigamo flying with one punch, Sanders showed no signs of emotion. 3 years ago, he could already spar with most of the Marines' vice admirals. Now his strength had increased dramatically. It was perfectly normal for him to take out Anigamo with ease. What he really wanted was for a swordsman to come up and confront him in the air. That was simply foolish. Looking at the panicking Marines below, Sanders felt no sympathy. From the moment Sengoku and Kizaru had teamed up to capture him, he had severed any ties with the Marines. Anigamo had said something very true. There was nothing to be said between criminals and the Marines. Only the outcome mattered. He summoned the thunder to destroy the entire fleet. This was his first gift to the Marines. It was also a declaration to the world that Sanders had returned. Soon, all the marine warships were destroyed. The sea was littered with wreckage, and countless marines wailed as they floated on the surface. Sanders didn't pursue them. A bunch of foot soldiers wasn't worth his effort. He descended from the air, gathering the wreckage of several warships together. He placed his hands on the wreckage. He activated the powers of the fusion fruit. This was the power he had just received from Douglas Bullet. He could rearrange and combine objects to create weapons or other things. As a child, Bullet had used this power on the battlefield to create endless weapons. And now, he wanted to use the fusion fruit's power to make himself a simple little boat. Recalling the design of the boat Vegapunk had created for him, Sanders began the construction using the fusion fruit's powers. He had just obtained this fruit's powers and was still unfamiliar with them. The wreckage of the warships continuously transformed in his hands. As time passed, it gradually took shape as a boat. The boat was about 6 or 7 meters long. It didn't look good but was usable at best. At least it was much better than Mihawk's coffin. At the very least, he could lie down and rest on it while sailing on the sea. There was even a small enclosed room for a toilet, so he wouldn't have to face the sea with his backside exposed. Most importantly, this boat was powered by electricity. As the user of the Rumble fruit, powering such a small boat was no pressure at all. Seeing the boat finally take shape, Sanders wiped the sweat from his forehead. Building a boat was much harder than battling Magellan. He jumped onto the little boat, channeling the power of the Rumble fruit into it. After slightly determining his direction, he sailed away from the red line at high speed, like a speedboat. After Sanders left, the dark clouds in the sky gradually dispersed, and the sun shone again on the sea surface. The sea kings in the depths of the ocean also began to swim toward the surface. About 5 minutes later, a flash of yellow appeared on the sea. Seeing the chaotic sea surface, Kizaru couldn't help but change his expression. "It seems I came too late, this is terrifying. It's Admiral Kizaru. Great! We're saved." Seeing Kizaru, the Marines on the sea were ecstatic. With an Admiral here, they no longer had to worry about becoming the Sea King's food. Before they could even breathe a sigh of relief, Sea Kings began to swim up from the ocean. They swallowed several Marines in one bite. "Help! There are Sea Kings! Save us!" The Marines cried out for help. "This is troublesome," Kizaru sighed, his fingertips glowing with yellow light, as a laser beam shot out, instantly piercing through the Sea Kings trying to devour the Marines. While releasing laser beams to drive away the Sea Kings, Kizaru took out a Den Mushi to call the fleet admiral. "Kizaru, has Sanders been recaptured?" As soon as the call connected, Sengoku's anxious voice came through. Kizaru tapped his ear, then released a laser beam, saying, "No, I'm too late, Fleet Admiral Sengoku." "What? Sanders escaped? How could it be so fast? What are Magellan and Onigamo doing?" Sengoku on the other end was shocked and immediately inquired about the situation. "Magellan is unaware of the situation, but the marine fleet outside Impel Down has been completely wiped out. Onigamo doesn't know where he ran off to, he might be dead." Looking around without finding Onigamo's presence, Kizaru said, "How could this happen? Have you asked the survivors where Sanders fled to? Is there any chance of catching up to him?" "Probably not." Kizaru glanced at the struggling and desperate Marines in the water, describing the scene. Sengoku remained silent for a moment before ultimately not ordering Kizaru to pursue. "Then it's settled. You stay there with the stranded Marines and wait for the fleet to arrive. There are medical personnel inside Impel Down, have them help treat the survivors." "Understood, Fleet Admiral." Kizaru breathed a sigh of relief and hung up the call. At least he wasn't sent to chase Sanders alone. Based on the situation on site, Sanders had managed to destroy the entire fleet outside of Impel Down in such a short time, showing his immense strength. If he went alone to chase, it would be fine if he didn't encounter him. If he did, it was likely the other side would fight to the death. Facing Sanders alone could lead to unexpected consequences. Earning just this little money for a month, what was the point of risking his life? Chapter 17, _billion Bounty. Kizaru stood on the wreckage of the battleships, guarding the fallen Marines. After about half an hour, the supporting Marine fleet finally arrived. Looking at the scattered wreckage of the ships on the sea, the arriving Vice Admiral had a grim expression. "Admiral Kizaru, has Sanders already escaped?" Vice Admiral Doberman asked Kizaru. "He was gone by the time I got here." "Quick, get those guys out of the water." The Sea Kings are about to have their fill. Kizaru motioned for the support fleet to start rescuing the Marines from the sea. What a terrifying guy! How on earth did he escape from Impel Down? And what about Vice Admiral Inigamo? Doberman sighed in disbelief. He was punched into the sea by Sanders. Not sure if he's still alive. Kizaru pointed toward the sea. Before the support arrived, Kizaru had already asked the surviving Marines for details. The Marines didn't know much about what happened before Sanders escaped from Impel Down. But they did witness him destroy the fleet and defeat Vice Admiral Inigamo with a single punch. One punch. When did this guy become so terrifying? Kizaru, with a cigar in his mouth, couldn't believe it. The others also had shocked expressions. They were all familiar with Inigamo's strength, as they were fellow vice admirals of the Marine headquarters. Sanders had sparred with them frequently 3 years ago. He was strong, but not strong enough to defeat an elite vice admiral in one blow. What had this guy been doing during those 3 years in Impel Down? Kizaru nodded and said, "Just one punch. You guys handle the rescue. I'll head to Impel Down to check things out and report to Fleet Admiral Sengoku." With that, Kizaru turned into a beam of light and sped toward Impel Down. Before long, Fleet Admiral Sengoku at Marine Headquarters received the full report. "What did you say? Magellan is seriously injured as well." Sengoku's expression was grave as he held the Den Mushi. "Yes, Fleet Admiral Sengoku. Aside from Vice Warden Hanyabal, who stayed in the control room, all of Impel Down's high-ranking officers were severely injured. According to Hanyabal, Sanders practically bulldozed his way out of Impel Down." Kizaru's sly expression appeared on the Den Mushi. After a moment of silence, Sengoku asked, "Kizaru, in your opinion, how strong is Sanders now?" "Hard to say, but he probably isn't much weaker than I am." Kizaru replied honestly. If he were in Sanders' position, he would have escaped as quickly as possible using his speed, rather than bulldozing through everything like Sanders did. "I understand. Stay on standby there for now until further instructions from the world government," Sengoku ordered before hanging up. With Magellan and Shiryu both gravely injured, Hanyabal alone couldn't keep the dangerous prisoners of Impel Down in check, so Kizaru couldn't be withdrawn just yet. Sengoku sat back in his office, his face dark with worry. The situation had spiraled out of control. Sanders now possessed the strength to contend with an admiral, making it nearly impossible to capture him again. Now, he had to figure out how the Marines should respond. The seas were growing more chaotic. Kaido, Whitebeard, and Big Mom were already known as the Sea Emperors. And there were growing voices calling Shanks the fourth Emperor of the Sea. The Marines had completely lost control of the New World. And now Sanders had escaped. Given his strength, there was no telling what kind of storm he would stir up on the seas. All of this gave Sengoku a splitting headache. If Sanders' adoptive father hadn't died 3 years ago, things would be much easier for him right now. With the 3 admirals, plus Sanders, who had admiral-level strength, the Marines could easily stand against the 4 emperors. But now, that Marine prodigy had turned completely against the Marines and the world government. Now, the Marines had one more powerful enemy to face. Sigh. With a heavy sigh, Sengoku picked up the Den Mushi to call the Gorosei. This wasn't something he could solve alone. After all, this whole situation had been caused by the world government and the Gorosei. They should share in the headache as well. At the world government, the Gorosei gathered in a meeting room, where the atmosphere was tense. "You've all heard Sengoku's report. Let's discuss how to handle this." Jagarsha Saturn, holding a cane, dressed in a black suit, with white curly hair and a bushy white beard, spoke softly. "What is there to discuss? Issue a bounty and have the Marines pursue him. That's all there is to it." The bald Gorosei, who held a katana, replied in a low voice. "Impel Down really is useless. We should have executed Sanders when we had the chance. Who could have predicted that he would break out of Impel Down and grow this strong?" The balding Gorosei with a mustache chimed in. "If Sanders could grow this strong in Impel Down, who knows how powerful he could become in a few more years. More importantly, Sanders was only 19 years old. He's just one man. It's no big deal. We've ruled the world for hundreds of years. How many powerful figures have turned to dust and bones? No matter how chaotic the seas become, the world government will always hold its ground." The long-bearded Gorosei, Marcus Mars, said nonchalantly. Whether it was Rock's crew in the past or Roger's crew after them, they were long gone now. But the world government still stood tall atop the seas, unshaken. The problem with Sanders isn't just his strength. It's that he will surely target the world nobles. Unlike the lowly pirates, he doesn't care about the status of the celestial dragons. The balding Garosei spoke again. The room fell into silence. There were some on the seas who weren't afraid of the celestial dragons. But few actively provoked them. Even the sea emperors didn't actively target the world nobles. But Sanders was different. His adoptive father had been killed by a celestial dragon. And now, with his newfound strength and lack of allegiance, he might start actively hunting them down. That was what truly concerned them. If too many celestial dragons were killed, their mystique and authority would diminish greatly. And once that happened, more people would dare to challenge them. Why not invite him to become a warlord of the sea? The curly-haired Garosei suggested. The warlord system was a mechanism established by the world government. Every member was a well-known and powerful pirate. Only those with high notoriety and immense strength qualified to become warlords. At the moment, the ranks of the warlords weren't fully filled. As long as he doesn't harm the world nobles, giving him a seat isn't out of the question. But will he agree? The bald Garosei doubted that Sanders would agree. Let's try, anyway. But first, we need to discuss the bounty for Sanders. 1.5 billion berries. His strength and threat level certainly warrant that. Perhaps this could cause him some trouble. Many pirates care about bounties. It's common for them to kill each other for a higher bounty. If Kaido or Whitebeard cross paths with Sanders, it could work in our favor. The curly-haired Garosei added. Agreed. Agreed. Chapter 18, Praising to Death? The sea trembles. When Fleet Admiral Sengoku received the world government's plan to place a bounty of 1.5 billion berries on Sanders, he was shocked. The amount was outrageous. He had originally planned for the bounty to be around 1 billion berries. Even the right-hand men of the Sea Emperor's Whitebeard's Phoenix Marco, Kaido's Calamity King, and Big Mom's Katakuri all had bounties under 1.4 billion berries. Yet, Sanders' first bounty was set at 1.5 billion berries. There were only a few people on the entire sea with higher bounties. However, when Sengoku considered that the bounty was determined by the threat to the world government, it made sense. While Phoenix Marco and the others were long-established, infamous pirates, they didn't actively provoke the world government. And they certainly didn't kill celestial dragons. Sanders was different. He had a grudge against the celestial dragons, and being a lone wolf without attachments, he was likely to seek revenge. Considering the suffering he endured in Impel Down, Sanders would undoubtedly retaliate fiercely. Sengoku wouldn't be surprised if Sanders started hunting celestial dragons worldwide. Such a high level of threat naturally surpassed that of Marco and the others. From this bounty, Sengoku could see the Garosei's underlying strategy of praising him to death. Think about it, someone just starting out with a higher bounty than even veteran pirates. How could those pirates possibly feel at ease? It would be perfectly normal for them to clash if they crossed paths. If they fought to the death, it would be highly beneficial to both the world government and the Marines. In the end, Sengoku agreed with the bounty amount. The bounty notice was immediately issued. Alongside the bounty notice, reports of Sanders' escape from Impel Down also spread across the sea. Headlines. After a decade, another escape from Impel Down. Is the fortress truly impregnable? The man who broke free from Impel Down once the marine prodigy, Sanders. Shocking. Lightning Fruit user Sanders successfully escapes. Divine retribution. A marine fleet destroyed. Vice Admiral Inigamo's fate unknown. Bounty of 1.5 billion berries. A super pirate is born. Thor Sanders, 1.5 billion berries bounty, dead or alive. As the bounty and reports were disseminated, countless newspapers scrambled to cover the story. As news crew delivered papers worldwide, the sea was in turmoil. The world was in an uproar. Countless people were stunned by the sudden news. No one had expected that someone could escape from the so-called impenetrable Impel Down. It had been over 10 years since the Golden Lion's escape. Many people no longer even knew who the Golden Lion was. In their eyes, Sanders was the first person to break out of the deep-sea prison. As a former marine prodigy, many still remembered him. After 3 years of silence, Sanders' name was once again on everyone's lips. As for Sanders' new moniker, it was personally given by Fleet Admiral Sengoku. No one knew if Sengoku had done it to annoy the world government. After all, the celestial dragons called themselves the descendants of the creators and considered themselves gods. Who knows if the Gorosei would be upset by Sanders' title? Perhaps this was Sengoku's subtle way of expressing his dissatisfaction with the Gorosei for ordering Sanders' arrest 3 years ago. Looking at the photos of the destroyed marine warships in the newspapers, many people felt chills running down their spines. Sweat poured from their foreheads. Hey, is this for real? Is this a joke? Someone escaped from Impel Down. Sanders, the former Marine Logia user? No wonder we haven't heard about him in years. He was imprisoned in Impel Down. Did he betray the Marines and the world government? Is the Marine joking? A bounty of 1.5 billion? Even Whitebeard's Phoenix Marco only has a bounty of 1.374 billion berries. What has Sanders done to deserve such a high bounty? This is terrifying. A whole Marine fleet was wiped out, and even Vice Admiral Inigamo couldn't stand against him. The entire sea was buzzing with discussions. Some were shocked that Sanders had escaped from Impel Down. Some questioned the Marines' decision, feeling that Sanders wasn't worth the 1.5 billion berries bounty. Others were puzzled as to why a former Marine genius had been imprisoned in Impel Down in the first place. For a while, the entire sea was abuzz. Countless pirates, Marines, and civilians were all talking about it. New World. Unknown sea region. A massive whale-shaped pirate ship sailed across the sea. The crescent-shaped flag of the Whitebeard pirates billowed in the wind. On the deck sat a tall, muscular man hooked up to and fore, his upper body covered in scars. A crescent-shaped white mustache curved upward on his face. This man was none other than one of the Sea Emperors, Whitebeard, the captain of the Whitebeard pirates Edward Newgate. At the moment, he was casually holding a barrel of sake and drinking deeply from it. "Father, you really should cut back on the alcohol." Marco, the phoenix with his pineapple-like hair, spoke helplessly. "Gururara. Marco, go drink with your brothers and leave me alone." Whitebeard laughed heartily, ignoring Marco's advice. Just then, a shout rang out from nearby. "You've got to be kidding. Someone actually escaped from Impel Down. And the Marines put a bounty of 1.5 billion berries on him? That's higher than Marco's." Marco turned and saw Diamond Yozua staring at the newspaper in shock. "Gururara. Marco, looks like today's paper has some big news." Whitebeard laughed again. Curious, Marco picked up a newspaper and began reading. "Thor Sanders, 1.5 billion berries bounty, dead or alive." "Whoa, wait a minute, 1.5 billion. That's more than mine." Marco's eyes widened in disbelief, nearly popping out of their sockets. After reading the detailed report, Marco muttered, "So it's him. He was imprisoned in Impel Down, and now he's escaped." A few years ago, the Marines had a known lightning fruit user. Many were aware of the existence of Sanders, one of the Marines' powerful Logia users. To deter the growing number of pirates, the Marines had even promoted the idea of the 4 Logia monsters. But 3 years ago, all news of Sanders suddenly vanished. Most people assumed he had died somewhere. No one expected he had been imprisoned in Impel Down. "What's going on, Marco? Has something interesting happened out on the sea?" Whitebeard asked when he saw his son frozen in place. Chapter 19, The Sea Emperors. Upon hearing Whitebeard's shout, Marco snapped back to his senses and brought the newspaper to Whitebeard. "Dad, do you remember that lightning fruit user from the Marines a few years ago?" "Lightning fruit?" Whitebeard had a momentary look of confusion before recalling it. "I remember. The Marines' lightning brat caused quite a stir in the first half of the Grand Line. Garp, that old guy, even boasted to me about how the Marines had gained an extraordinary genius." Whitebeard remembered Sanders. Not because of how talented he was, nor because of the lightning fruit, but because he thought this kid named Sanders could become a troublesome opponent for his sons in the future. In recent years, Whitebeard had gradually felt his age catching up with him. He realized he wouldn't be able to protect his sons for much longer, so he paid attention to rising stars in the Marines. "What happened to him?" Whitebeard asked. Marco raised the newspaper in his hand and said, "The paper says that 3 years ago, he betrayed the world government and was imprisoned in Impel Down. Now he's escaped, and his bounty is as high as 1.5 billion berries higher than mine." Gururara. No wonder we haven't heard from the lightning brat in so long. 2 years ago, when we fought Garp, I casually asked about him, and Garp's face turned as dark as a pot's bottom. So this is why. He's quite something, managing to escape from Impel Down. Sengoku must be having quite the headache now. The seas are getting more and more exciting. Gururera. Whitebeard's mood lifted at the thought of his old rival's face looking like he had just eaten something disgusting. He happily grabbed his barrel of sake and began drinking again. Wano country. Beast pirates. Kaido's enormous body was slumped on the ground, with a giant sake gourd beside him. He was completely drunk. The three major calamities of his crew had gathered together. One subordinate handed over the day's newspaper. As Kaido's right-hand man, King immediately picked up the newspaper to read it. Kaido wasn't one to handle the day-to-day matters, so most of the crew's affairs were managed by King. This habit also meant King regularly read the papers to gather intelligence. After scanning the news, King's eyes narrowed. Kaido-sama. Kaido took a swig of sake and wiped the corner of his mouth, asking, "What is it, King?" The former marine lightning fruit user has broken out of prison. Lightning fruit? Wasn't he with the Marines? Kaido looked puzzled for a moment, not immediately understanding why a Marine would need to break out of prison. He betrayed the Marines and has now escaped from Impel Down. His bounty is set at 1.5 billion berries. Oh ho 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 ho, impressive. Kaido was surprised. To be worth 1.5 billion berries, even accounting for some inflation, he must be quite strong. Should I send someone to recruit him? A person who can escape from Impel Down and is a lightning fruit user is naturally not weak. Most importantly, he's still under 20 years old. King asked for instructions. Though the beast pirates were known for their members mostly being Zoan-type users, they weren't entirely without other types. A lightning fruit user who could break out of Impel Down was someone worth recruiting. If Saunders could join them, their strength might finally surpass the other Yonko crews. Yes, the Yonko. King was certain that red-haired Shanks would soon become the fourth emperor. The competition among the Sea Emperors was growing fiercer. A powerful Logia user would bring significant advantages. Someone who escapes from Impel Down won't easily submit to others, Kaido said after taking another drink. Still, we should at least try. If another pirate crew recruits him, it would be troublesome for us. Then leave it to you. If he can escape like Shiki did, I wouldn't mind offering him a position as one of our top officers. Kaido waved dismissively. Kaido and Shiki had both once been members of the Rocks Pirates. Kaido knew Shiki's strength well. If Saunders had the ability to escape Impel Down like Shiki, then he was worth offering a high position. Totland, Whole Cake Island. Big Mom showed no reaction to Saunders' escape. She was more focused on having children and eating. As long as Saunders didn't provoke her, she didn't care who he was. Somewhere in the New World, red-haired Shanks was preparing to solidify his position as the fourth Sea Emperor. "Captain, this guy might become a future opponent," Ben Beckman said, cigarette in mouth. From the limited information in the newspaper, Ben Beckman could already sense that Saunders was strong. Someone like him, especially at such a young age, would definitely aim to become Pirate King. And to do that, one must first contend with the Sea Emperors. Challenging the Yonko? Then let him come. Shanks said with a carefree smile. No, I mean it won't be right away. He doesn't even have a crew yet. But in the future, he might be the first to challenge us. Ben Beckman explained. By the time Saunders formed his own pirate crew, Shanks would already be one of the Yonko. As a newly established Sea Emperor, Shanks would be the first to face challenges. The red-haired pirates fear no challenge. As long as he's prepared for it. Shanks' serious expression quickly vanished, and he burst into hearty laughter. To celebrate the arrival of another interesting figure on the seas, let's throw a party. Woohoo! Party time! Party! Party! Everyone on the pirate ship cheered loudly. Barrels of alcohol were brought up on deck, the cooks started preparing food, and soon, a grand feast was underway. Chapter 20, Reactions from All Sides. Dressrosa. Doflamingo, one of the current warlords of the sea, was holding a newspaper. With his golden blonde hair, sunglasses and wearing his signature pink feather coat and cropped pants, he walked with pointed shoes. Fuff. A frightening man, indeed, to escape from Impel Down. Looking at the news about Saunders' escape, Doflamingo wiped the sweat from his forehead. Young master, should we try to recruit him? Treble asked in a nasally voice, with a string of snot dangling from his nose. Fuff, recruit him? Don't be ridiculous. His foster father was killed by the celestial dragons. As an underground broker, Doflamingo was well aware of why Saunders betrayed the world government. A terrifying man like Saunders, who held a grudge against the Celestial Dragons, was someone he would stay far away from, not approach. Young master, it's not like we can't cooperate with him. You may have once been a Celestial Dragon, but you also bear grudges against them. In that sense, our goals align when it comes to opposing the world government and the Celestial Dragons, Treble analyzed, sniffling. We'll wait and see for now. But you're right about one thing, Saunders' escape will cause big trouble for the world government. The more chaotic the world becomes, the better. Let's turn the world ruled by those fools in the Holy Land upside down. Fuff. Marine Headquarters Hospital. Outside a hospital room, two figures stood, a man and a woman. The man wore a pink bandana on his head, looking somewhat eccentric. The woman had long, wavy sea blue hair, a tall figure, and striking beauty. Are you sure we should give him this newspaper? Do you really think Z would be happy about it? Anne asked softly, frowning. Saunders was one of the teacher's favorite students. Maybe hearing this news will lift his spirits, Binns replied quietly. The two were the only survivors of the attack on Z's training ship. A year ago, Z's training ship was ambushed, and all the trainees on board were killed except for Anne and Binns. Z's right arm was also severely injured, effectively rendering it useless. Losing his arm and seeing his beloved students die had left Z in despair. Anne and Binns had tried everything to bring him out of his depression, but nothing worked. Now, with the news of Saunders' escape from Impel Down, Binns thought it might be their chance. But Z-sensei hates pirates the most. Saunders is no different from a pirate now. Plus, he destroyed an entire marine fleet when he escaped from Impel Down. Anne was worried. If Z saw that his favorite student had become no better than a pirate, it might just break his heart even more. Anne, we both know this isn't Saunders' fault. I believe Z will understand, don't you? Binns's words seemed to relax Anne, and she eventually nodded. All right, let's give it a try. Seeing Anne's approval, Binns smiled, then gently pushed the door open and walked inside. In the hospital room, Z lay on the bed, his right arm gone, leaving an empty space where it once was. What are you two doing here? Z asked weakly, his face haggard, eyes lifeless. Z-sensei, there's news about Saunders, Binns said cautiously. Saunders? Z raised his eyelids, surprised. Wasn't he imprisoned in Impel Down? Did he die? His expression dimmed at the thought. Z knew much about what had happened to Saunders. He had even argued with Sengoku about it, but when the order came from the five elders, there was nothing Z could do but watch his prized student be thrown into the hellish Impel Down. Since then, he'd hardly spoken to Sengoku or Kizaru. No. Saunders escaped. Binns quickly handed the newspaper to Z, then stood silently alongside Anne. Z flipped through the newspaper, his expression complex. He didn't know whether to feel happy or angry. On one hand, one of his best students had effectively become a pirate. By all rights, Z should be furious and ready to hunt him down for betraying everything the Marines stood for. But Z also knew this wasn't Saunders' fault. If it hadn't been for the Celestial Dragons. By now, Saunders could have been a Marine Vice Admiral, commanding operations against pirates across the seas. Marine Base. Akainu, smoking a cigar, looked through the newly issued bounty notice from headquarters. If he's escaped, then he's a pirate. I will personally bring him to justice once more. With that, Akainu's hand erupted in magma, reducing Saunders' bounty notice to ashes. Logetown. Smoker stared at Saunders' bounty notice with a complicated expression. So, you escaped after all. I knew you wouldn't quietly die in a prison cell. Years ago, both Smoker and Saunders had trained together under Z. As two Logia users, it was only natural for them to be compared. The result had been clear: Smoker had been utterly defeated. Even without relying on his devil fruit abilities, Saunders had easily outclassed Smoker. Since then, Smoker had thrown himself into training, determined to someday overcome Saunders. But instead, all he'd heard was news of Saunders betraying the Marines and being thrown into prison. When Saunders was captured, Smoker refused to believe that his former comrade had truly turned traitor. He had submitted report after report to headquarters, requesting a chance to meet Saunders face to face. Every single request was denied. Now that Saunders had escaped from Impel Down, Smoker would finally have the chance to ask him in person what had really happened 3 years ago.
Thanks for listening.